Thanks all for coming. Welcome to the landscape photography class, taking it up a notch. I'm super excited to share with you guys today because Angie and I decided when we retired that I would, well, both of us would be taking landscape photography workshops, and we were going to target the top shooters in the world. So in the last 2 to 3 years, she and I have spent lots of time and lots of travel money to shoot with the best shooters in the world. And one guy in particular who I'm going to be actually highlighting a lot today, his name is Mark Adamus. So the heart of what I'm going to be talking about today actually came from Mark. Again, welcome to everybody here, and welcome to those that are watching by YouTube later, if this film turns out. Glad to have you here. And we'll go ahead and get started. This is what we'll look at today. We're going to cover the whys of landscape shooting, why it's important, why it has value, why I love it so much. And then we'll cover the actual shooting mechanics. So this is a little bit more of what we're going to be talking about. I'll cover a little bit of kind of where I am in my journey right now. And then we'll cover the whys of landscapes. And then I'm going to spend some time on gear. As I mentioned, I'm going to unpack my bag basically and show you what's in there. And then we're going to take a break, and when we come back, I hope you guys are all ready to go. Grab some coffee or something, because this is the best material I could possibly share with you, where the star is. And then we'll go into planning. I had a question yesterday from somebody here, I forget who it was now, asked me about planning. Planning is one of the most important parts about getting great photographs. When I go out, I usually have a target list of 2 or 3 shots that I already know in my head what I'm going after. So when I go out, I'm on a mission. I'm searching. I'm not just out there trying to find a composition. I know where I'm looking for, what I'm looking for, and where I'm going. So I usually end up with far better shots that way. And I'm going to teach my planning, how I do my planning and so forth. And then we'll do the field shoot, which is the it's a 13-minute movie of the shoot. It was a lot of fun to go out and do that. And I actually won an international contest with one of the shots from that morning. So you'll be seeing that later. And then we'll talk about editing. I could do another class on editing. I edit. It'll take me anywhere from 2 to 5 hours on a single edit. And sometimes I'll walk away from it for a day and come back with fresh eyes and do more. So that's a whole other class, which I might do that on the internet. But we did a time-lapse of a 3-hour edit, which you guys see. It's a 3-minute film, so you'll be able to see that too. You can see the process that I go through, the thinking. Okay, so that's pretty much it. Okay, so credentials, I'll go through this fairly quickly. I'm a really fortunate guy. My wife probably loves to adventure with her camera as much as I do. And we just have a great time together. It's fortunate, I think, because a lot of couples don't have that availability. It's too bad in the workshops. Mostly it's one or the other of the couple that's there. And the other one is home minding the kids or the home or whatever. But with us, we go together, and it's not because she's just wanting to be with me, although I think that's part of it. I don't know. But she's off on her own, finding her own compositions. Usually when we get to a site, I'm going one way because, like I said, I know what I'm looking for. She's like going her own way. She finds her own compositions, which are wonderful. She's got a whole different eye than I do. She finds things I don't see. She edits differently, and that's really cool. So I'm a fortunate guy that I have her to go along with, and I love everything about it. I love the planning. I love all the hiking in the dark with headlamps on into the wilderness areas. I love being up there before sunrise. I love being out there in the wilderness and feeling the breezes and just hearing the total quiet in wilderness, and to have no light pollution when you're up in the mountains and so forth. I just love finding the beauty that's resonant in those places, and then using the technical skills that we garner in these classes, and also the light that happens at the bookends of the day, to capture that beauty somehow and then share it with others. And I'm going to be talking more about that quite a bit today. Most of the stuff I shoot does not have a heartbeat. I'm sort of like Ron. He likes to shoot landscapes like I do because things sit still and you can think about things and you can sit down. And in my case, I actually do sit down. And I compose and I think about settings and I think about everything. With birds, you're kind of on the fly, so to speak, no pun intended. And they're moving and they never sit still and they're moving out of your frame, and it's tough to compose. And that's a whole, she loves that. She's a Venice girl. She likes to go down to the Audubon Rookery with me, and we shoot the birds down there. But anyway, so What does my work look like? Okay, you guys have seen this shot. A lot of you have. If you were in the meeting a few years, well, we started in August, so it would have probably been the August meeting of the club. I put this up in Dave Kershan's Share Your Work the first night, and this was last summer in Glacier National Park at a place called Grinnell Point. That's Grinnell Point right there. And we're staying in this wonderful Glacier Park Lodge, and they're just, you know, these places are magnificent. Right across from Grinnell Point. So we had the ability to get up before sunrise and walk out and actually see all this weather happening in this crazy weather. I mean, it was raining sheets over here, and then of course the rainbow and the sun coming up all at the same time. So it was a confluence of a lot of things that don't happen that often. But when it happens, it's magical, and you got to be ready because this comes and goes quickly. So this shot actually went on to win an International Photography Award. And this is a group called Universe of Color Photography. It's out of Menorca, Spain. It's one of those two islands. They have 52,000 competing photographers on there from all around the world, and some of the best you'll ever see are on there. There's magnificent photographers, really good people from Netherlands and just all over the place. Koreans, just really good photographers. So if you are able to get into a category and win an award in a category, which this did, and won the landscape category, it's a big deal because 52,000 potential viewers on that site who are all interested in photography see you kind of winning the contest. It's a great feeling. It's a huge honor. Well, anyway, this one went on to win the solo award for the whole thing. It took the whole thing. They give you this Master of Photography award, and there's only one given, and they put this up on as the banner on their website, and it was like, you know, mind-blowing. I just couldn't believe it. And I thought about it a lot since then. I don't quite understand why some photos do that and some don't, but this one did. It went to the top. So anyway, I'll just continue moving here. So these are the landscape category awards. They do this monthly, and then they post the winners, and you get these certificates, and it's a pretty big deal. I think I love being on there. The people are really supportive of each other. You feel good. They make you feel good, and it gets a lot of publicity around the world when you get these things. So I was fortunate enough to win the category in landscape 7 times since I got on there. And this, by the way, right here, I want you to pay particular attention to, because that's that is the shot that won the award, and that's where we're going next Saturday. This is one of the places you'll see out there. When you're walking out from the parking lot, you walk out this tunnel of trees, and you come out through this chute here, and there's this trail leading out to the beach in the Gulf, and you've got these marvelous Norwegian pines that form sort of an arch over the pathway. So there's a great composition there. When I saw it, I went crazy. You'll see later, because we actually filmed this when I shot it. I knew when I shot it, I thought, wow, that's a really cool composition. Internal framing with the trees, you got the leading line, you got the cool to warm colors, dark to light, you got all this stuff going on, which I'll be teaching you later, so don't get worried about that. I was also published in a British magazine with a lot of other people. You know, they talk about your work and so forth. This happened to be a long exposure magazine, and I had a shot in there where I had shot some slow shutter stuff, and they liked it and did a little thing for me. We live out on Perico Island, and they have this newsletter that goes out to the 795 residences out there on Perico Island. And this lady from the Northeast publishes this really nice newsletter every month while the snowbirds are down here anyway. It's only like 6 months of the year. But she's been after me for a while, and my wife, for photography that she can put on the covers of her newsletters. So I felt that was a really huge honor. And by the way, the March issue will have Angie Blunt's name down here, which is kind of cool. That was her first publishing gig. This is a long story, which I'll make very short. This is a calendar that Anna Maria Life publishes yearly. And so we submitted photos for it because we're out on Anna Maria shooting all the time. We're out on Bean Point, and we'd love to traipse around with our cameras out there in the sand at low light. And we submitted, and we got the results back for the pages, the 12 months, and I was kind of disappointed because mine wasn't in there and hers wasn't either. And we're like, oh, let down, oh well, time to move on. So we get the calendar in the mail because we'd submitted, they send calendars to everybody. And it turned out mine was on the cover, so it turned out okay after all. And I'm gonna just pause for a second here and talk a little bit about this technique. This is what I call a radial blur. You basically tripod your camera and kind of aim towards the center point like that. Put it on like a 1/6 of a second, a slower shutter. And then as the shutter is tripped, while that shutter's open, you zoom your lens in. You don't want to jar your camera too much, but it's called a radial blur. And it causes these lines to kind of go out from the center. You can see these clouds are kind of extended, and you get these rays of light coming down through here. That's because of the zooming action. And we can do this when we're out there on the island. If anybody wants to try it, I'd be glad to show you how to do it. We also sold in the art fairs up in northern Ohio for a while. We had our own tent, which was a real pain to set up. These poles were so heavy. It was a job, wasn't it? That was a lot of work, oh my word. But we met some great people. We had friends stopping in, we made new friends, and these prints weighed about 40 pounds a piece, so we were lugging like 600 pounds of prints and all these tent poles, and I felt like I was in the circus, to be honest with you. If anybody's done it, you know what I mean? It's like, and you do this all like quickly, and then you show your stuff for 3 days and you talk your breath away, and then you got to pack up in 3 hours and get it out of there. There's a little pit boss that runs around like in a golf cart and says, okay, everybody out here. And it's just crazy. So we didn't last all that long, part of the season, and I sold the tent and we moved on. So anyway, we're just having fun now. It's not commercial for us at all. We're just having a good time. So this guy, while we're in the tent, this guy comes strolling into the tent. Total character. His name is Bill Nadeau. He's a watercolor artist in Cleveland, Ohio. And he was on a mission himself, and he came in and he said, he said, I would like to paint your photographs. And I said, oh, you're kidding. He said, no. He said, I love your compositions. I would like to be able to use them for my watercolor art. And he was such a character and such a cool guy. And his wife came in with a little white poodle dog in hand and was that, okay, whatever. Where's the release? I'll sign it. So we signed it, and then I kind of forgot about it. And just recently I went onto his website down here. And he's a commercial watercolor artist, and I found 6 of my compositions were on his website. So I probably should have asked for a commission or something. I don't know. But I mean, here he is painting all my stuff. And then this is kind of interesting too. Does anybody recognize this place? This is local. You got it. Yep, Starfish Cafe. Wonderful place to go down and shoot boats, old fishing boats and birds, and they serve pretty good grouper sandwiches down there too. Cool place. So let's see, what else? Well, this is rather interesting. Does anybody here post out to Facebook groups of any sort, affinity groups? Like if you're a dog lover, you might go on a Facebook dog site, and there might be 30,000 dog lovers on there. Well, they have the same thing for landscapes, and they have quite a few of them actually, and there's some really good ones. So I started posting, and I'll talk more about this later, but these groups were like heisting my photos and using them for their banners on their pages without asking me. And I, well, that's nice, but could you have just asked? It would have been nice. I didn't even know they were up until I just spotted one. I spotted this one because this has been up for almost a year. It's been up a long time. Maybe not a year, maybe half a year, but it's been up there a long time. And so it turns out when you join these groups, here's my point, you kind of it's part of the rules that, they can use your photography for whatever means they want because you're on their group and you kind of sign it away when you join. So it's part of the deal. And I'm glad to see them, frankly. The more I thought about it, I thought, what a privilege to have your stuff up there that people see it all the time. Although I think they take your signatures off. I don't know if you can actually see any of them, but it doesn't really matter. It's fun. And these groups are really fun to be involved with because everybody on there has an eye for landscapes. You don't have motorcyclists on here. You don't have race car guys. They're all landscape photographers. And so when they're commenting, they're coming from that point of view, and it's really cool. Some of these groups are enormous. Which I'll talk about more a little bit later. And I'll talk about the best ones to get involved with if you're interested. This is just another thing that happened. I was asked to join a professional critique site, which was a huge honor from a guy named Sean Bagshaw. I know that Rena Walkling knows who that is. We were talking about Sean before. He teaches Photoshop and luminosity masking, the TK panel, online. He has his own YouTube channel. He's a pretty famous guy, and Anyway, so he invited me into the group after we shot with him in Switzerland, and this just showed up. The site has hundreds and hundreds of pros on there. They're all judging each other's work, and this showed up as an editor's pick for the whole year of 19, which blew my mind. It was just some soapy bubbles down on Bean Point. It was like no big deal, but that was kind of fun because there's some big names on there. You might recognize Tony Kuiper. Guy Tal is right today, I believe it's today, or maybe it was yesterday. He's doing a Ask Me Anything thing where for 24 hours you can ask Guy Tal any question you want. If you know Guy Tal, I mean, if you're a landscaper, you would know who that is because he's written many books and is very famous. Alan Briat's on there, Alex Noriega, and Charlotte Gibb. These are all really big names in the landscape world. Okay, we got to skip through this. We got more to go. Recently, I started producing YouTube tutorials because I found myself studying them myself and learning a boatload of stuff because you can stop, you know, if you don't quite understand something, you can back it up and you can go through it again and take your time and then walk away from it, go get something to eat and come back, and you can study at your own pace, and I found them very, very helpful. And that's really actually the reason we're doing this today with the camera, is because I want people out there to be able to do the same. But anyway, so I have got like 4 videos up now. You're gonna see about 75% of them today. In this class, they'll be embedded in the film. But my intent is to produce more of these videos from our website, and they're also available to the club if anybody wants to see them. Well, they can also link into our website. There's a number of different ways that can happen, but they're all free. There's no charge or any obligation whatsoever. And I'm just teaching stuff that we're picking up in the workshops, the aha stuff. I'm not teaching fundamentals. I don't really think I'm very good at that, but I do go into some stuff that were really big, huge aha moments for me, and I'm going to go into some of those today. And this film hopefully will be up, let's see, we're into March, so probably by late April, early May, I'll have this film up on the internet with a link for anybody who wants to review it or watch it. So let's see. Okay, so we're done with that. Good. Okay, so let's talk about the whys of landscape photography. And I'm just going to tell you a quick story. I had this love for landscapes when I was a boy. If I think back carefully, I can remember walking into a friend's house of my dad's, and he had this marvelous picture of this stream kind of winding down through some rocks and flowers, and it just caught my attention. I just fell in love with it. I thought, wow, that is so pretty. And so it's kind of lay there latent for a lot of years. When I got into college, and a buddy of mine had a Nikon camera, and he talked me into getting some kind. I had a Pentax P1000 or something, one of the early cameras, and we would just go out and shoot and have fun. Well, and my dad talked me into going after a advanced degree in Wisconsin, and I found myself in the darkroom at the University of Wisconsin. Like, you know, every chance I got, I was running off to the darkroom. And so I sat down with my dad and I said, Dad, I think I want to be a photographer. And he just looked at me like, nope, I'm paying for your school. And you got to kind of go with the flow here. Get your marketing degree, you know, and, you know, so I just put it off. And it's unfortunate, but I did for many years. Went through schooling, you know, went through a sales career in the healthcare industry. And so when I retired, I sat down on the porch one day out in Ohio, where we were living at that time, and I was asking really deep questions with a cup of coffee at like 5 o'clock in the morning. Like, what is it I would really have loved to have done with my life if it wasn't about money? If I could just do it and not even think about money, what would it have been? And the answer was immediately photography. So I had my direction for retirement, and we've been going ever since. My dad asked me 2 questions during that time where I asked him if I could be a photographer. He says, well, what are you going to do with all those photos? And he said, and the other question was, well, it was a statement of, it was his opinion. He said, and by the way, if you don't have people in your photos, forget it. They won't be worth anything in the final analysis. I'm like, okay, Dad, I've heard enough. I'm done. So that's not the end of the story. So my dad was an executive at an advertising agency. He was around photographers and artists and writers all day long, and he knew these people. And some of those guys make it really big. I know one guy who was making thousands of dollars an hour, shooting like milk duds in a studio in Chicago, and McDonald's hamburgers, and thousands of dollars an hour. I mean, it was like $5,000 an hour. You can even imagine that kind of money. He'd work for like 3 months and take the rest of the year off. It was crazy. So, you know, I heard that story much later. I'm glad I didn't hear it before, because I probably would have gone back to my dad. But anyway, so my dad retires and he starts painting. And he's painting landscapes and seascapes. And not just one. He painted how many? We have, the three Blunt kids have paintings, these acrylics, all over our houses. There's like no place to put anything else because of my dad's paintings. He found the joy of it. He discovered it, you know. Unfortunately, he discovered it a little late for my sake, but anyway, he painted almost till the day he died. He painted, and we still got paintings we don't know what to do with, and only one of them that the Blunt kids know about has a person in it, just one. That's it. So, you know, sometimes you just have to go with your gut, but I didn't, unfortunately. So, and here's the end of the story. So later on, I start shooting in retirement, and what am I shooting? The same stuff he was painting. You learn lessons the hard way sometimes. So why landscape photography? Why is it people love landscapes so much, the grand landscapes? And I think the reason is because we derive so much joy in the process of doing this, you know, in the blue hour in front of the Tetons and these magnificent barns. There's so much that happens internally to you. There's so much joy that's generated there, that somehow if we can capture the essence of that and transfer it onto a slide or whatever, in these days digital files, and other people see them, they can vicariously pick up some of that joy that we felt if we do it well. So I'm going to tell you just another story to illustrate this. I think this is pretty deep, and I think this is the reason that I photograph. It's the reason. I had seen pictures of this place in Rocky Mountain National Park in Colorado near Estes Park. And this is Hallett Peak up here, and this is called Dream Lake. And it's this beautiful glacial cirque lake at the bottom of this magnificent peak. And I've seen lots of pictures of it because mainly people hike up in the middle of the day, usually up there around 11 or 12. They have lunch and they will hike back down. And these blue skies in Colorado are so magnificent in the summer. They're hard to describe. They're so beautiful. So you see tons of these shots. I mean, thousands of them. If you go look for them, you'll find them. And I thought to myself, wait a minute here. Those are kind of tourist shots. I mean, these are the shots people pull their iPhones out and they shoot it. And they go home and they're happy to have them. They can share them with their friends and stuff, but there's something more you can do here. So I got thinking, this peak is facing due east, right? So it's facing the sunrise. And I thought to myself, and probably somebody else had the idea first, I don't know, but anyway, I thought, what a great idea if we hiked up there before sunrise and got set up down here at the end of the lake or wherever we set up. Actually, I was over here. And shot that peak. As the sun comes up, it hits the top of the mountain first, and it paints it red. It just comes down in a red line. It's magnificent. It's called Alpenglow out west. And I thought, wow, that would be so cool if we could do that. So I got this idea. Now here's this pre-planning stuff I was talking about, right? Thinking about it ahead of time. Here's a target shot I had in mind, and I started to think to myself, okay, the hardest part of this whole process is convincing my wife that it's a good idea to hike into the wilderness at 4:30 in the morning with headlamps on in pure wilderness. There's nobody up there. Well, at least when we were going out, there was nobody up there. During the day, there are people that hike in there. But one thing in our favor was there are no grizzly bear left in Montana, in Colorado rather. There are in Montana, but not so in Colorado. So you don't have the active grizzly like you do in Glacier National Park, right? At sunrise, they're moving around a lot up there, and you got to be careful. But in Colorado, you don't have to worry about it. So that one thing was in our favor. So she said yes, and we had decided that we were going to. Sunrise was at 5:45, so you kind of plan backwards. You know, the blue hour, which is the beautiful light, usually starts a half hour before. So 5:15. We should have been ready, all the settings done, ready to shoot 5:15. Okay, so that meant we had an hour hike plus, you know, setup time and all that, composing time. An hour hike up into the wilderness just to get there, and we were probably 40 minutes from the hotel to the trailhead. So the long and short of it is we were up around 3 a.m. And I'm very fortunate that she's a good egg about this. She actually likes this stuff, I think. If she doesn't, she hasn't said anything to me about it. So, So we started hiking, and here we are in the dark, headlamps on, the whole shooting match, and that was the most amazing hike because we were hiking up this beautiful mountainside, and as you looked over, I forget the name of the peak. There's a big peak there in Estes that's gigantic, very famous peak. Long's Peak, is it? Anyway, and the stars are so bright because there's no light pollution just everywhere, and you're just all alone out there in the wilderness. I tell you, that feeling is just so cool. I just live for this. I love this stuff. So we did see two other guys walking down that night, which has really shocked us, kind of. They had a rack on their shoulders between two of them, and they'd been filming time lapses of the stars traveling across the sky. But they were the only guys we saw up there as we walked up. So we crested into the lake basin. We knew we were in the lake basin, and we kind of see down the lake a little bit. It was still dark. I went left, she went right, and I set up on some rocks at the end of the lake. And I was straddling two rocks over the water in the dark with a headlamp on, and I was going to do a panoramic because it's all pretty close up there. So I was going to shoot like a four-shot vertical panoramic with your camera vertically like this, and I was going to shoot four of them and then stitch them, which I did. It turned out great, but that's a lot of preparation, thinking, and your settings and all that. You have to be ready, as I said before. When the light starts coming down that mountain, you got to be ready. You can't be thinking about, okay, what do I do now when the light starts? You better be ready because it'll only last a few minutes. You're chasing the light. That's really what it's all about. So we waited, and the wind was blowing in my face. This Chinook wind was coming down the mountain and hit me in the face. I was like 30 miles an hour, and it was just, I just was just in total awe of the whole thing. It was just this majesty out there. And then all of a sudden this starts, this beautiful, this is a little more saturated. It's a lot more saturated than it is on my screen. That's just, part of what you do with these screens. But this is what happens. It starts at the very top, and it just comes right down like this. And then finally it fills the basin, the lake basin. But this is probably 5 minutes, maybe. I don't know if it's even that long. It happens very quickly. So Angie's over here somewhere, and here's the point of the story. You're kind of wondering where I'm going with this. When this started happening, I knew Angie was going to be somewhere else. She liked to shoot over here. That perspective, that's totally cool. I get that. We've done this for a while. But my thought was, where is she? I hope she's seeing this. Because you're just I don't know, at that moment, it's just like, wow. I mean, what can you even say when you see things like this? Anyway, so my thought was, where is she? I hope that she's seeing this. I hope she's not facing the other way, or she's off walking around and doing something elsewhere, shooting a flower or something. I hope she's seeing this, right? And this is the point of this whole story. The point is that that's a very natural human reaction when you see beauty that's just overwhelming. What happens to you? You think, where's somebody that I can share this with, right? You want them to feel the same joy. So here's the motive that I arrived on for me, why I do this, why we spend all this money, why we do all this traveling. It's to be able to have somebody see a photo and go, whoa, with 3 exclamation points. Or you'll see some comments later, and that to me is the loop on this whole thing. When people come back and they say, whoa, I feel like I'm right there. And I remember a scene like that from my childhood. You get all these comments that just, they're vicariously feeling the same joy that you felt. So this is really for me about sharing joy. And the whole process for me is you go find the beauty, you use your technical skills to capture it the best you possibly can, and then you share it. This is a big part of it, sharing it. And then you wait to see what happens. And when you start getting the comments back, and there's ways to do that where you can get a lot of feedback in a hurry on your work. And if you see the joy is there, then it's just the best feeling in the whole world. And I think even people that are shooting commercially maybe got into photography because of this very same motive. I'm guessing, I don't know. But I know that when people see something that's just incredible, you gotta share it. It's a natural reaction that we all have. So this is one of the comments that came in from a lady up in Ohio that we used to be in another camera club with. No, is that Kathy O'Connor? Was she in our club? I forget. Anyway, she's on our Facebook page, and she comes in, and there's that word, that wonderful word, And I see this, and I think, wow, it actually worked. Somehow she's feeling joy because of my work, and that's so cool. Here's another one. This lady is a kind of a new friend on Facebook. I don't know her. She's an elderly lady. I wish I could put into words the things I feel. You know, I feel the peace of the scene calming me. I love this stuff. I keep them, obviously. I keep the comments. You and Angie, and she's included in this, brighten our days with your amazing photos. Keep them coming. Your photos, I run out of words. They move me, you know, with an exclamation point. This is what I do this for. This is all the payment I would ever need. So anyway, that's it on that. I'm going to go into a short video here. This is a video my wife did. I give her credit for this. It's a 31-second video, but it's a full hour of time-lapse photography in Glacier National Park of the sunup on Grinnell Point. I just want you to notice as we go through this, it goes pretty quick, how the light changes second by second. And when you're out there, you've got lots of opportunities for different lighting situations just in that short time. So take a look at this. There's like a lot of really cool shots in that, and they're different. You know, the light changes so quickly. So preparation, being ready when the stuff starts to happen, and then know what you're looking for, wait for the moment, and then just do your thing, and hopefully you get it. And that's what this is about. It's about chasing light. And a big part of what we do as landscape photographers is we chase light, and because landscape photography, in my opinion, and other people would disagree with me, but in my opinion, color is king. Let me put it that way in landscape photography. Colors really get people's attention, and different colors get a different reaction. Reds, we talked about it yesterday in a class that Ron and I were in. Reds are just like, they just get your attention right now. So when you see sunrises like this, that's pretty powerful. It grabs you. It's like, whoa, you know, it's that red light or that pink light, whatever. So we chase light, and if you're going to chase light, that means getting up early. It means shooting some really weird hours when people are still sleeping. It means sometimes when people are having dinner, late dinner, you're out on the beach shooting, you know, as the light's going down. And even after the light goes down, some of the best light actually, I think personally, is in the blue hour. It's after the sun sets. The contrast lessen, light gets softer, pastels start to show up. And this Mark Adamus fellow that I'm going to be talking about later said on the index of light, the light is actually best before sunrise. Like 30, 40 minutes before sunrise, the color index of light is actually at its peak. So we're shooting at some pretty weird hours. And I don't want to scare anybody off, but if that's part of the fun of it, is being out at that time of the day. The world's asleep and you're out shooting. It's a magnificent time to be awake and alert. There is a price to pay. You got to get up early, you stay up late. But for she and I, it's like our very favorite time of the day. We just can't hardly wait for it. So, okay, let's see, where are we going here? Takeaway, shoot the early and late light. You have to, if you're gonna do this sincerely, if you shoot the daylight hours, okay, here's an example. This is the daylight shot, right? This is the tourist shot. This is the one you see on Google, the one that everybody takes because they're out in the middle of the day and it's comfortable and it's warm, and you pull your camera up and shoot it. And a lot of pros shoot the middle of the day. I don't know why. But to me, the artists out there that are doing, and I'm not saying this is, but the people who are producing the art in landscape photography are out at the bookends of the day. It's just a given, you have to do it. If you're shooting in the middle of the day, you're taking tourist shots, and there's nothing wrong with that. We all do it. We love to share them with our friends and family, but you'll miss that wow factor, that really sincere, deep, guttural whoa, you know, that people will say when they see your photography. And that's what we're after. We want that. Okay, so we're going to go into gear, and then we're going to take a break, and we'll go into that really meaty, wonderful section that will be the heart of the day. And it's going to be exciting after the first break, so we'll go through this fairly rapidly. But we do have some beginners in the room, and I know there will be some on the internet, so we're going to go through gear. I'm basically going to unpack my gear bag. This is all what I consider the essential gear, and you don't have to copy this right now because I'm going to start going through individual items, and I'll put this up again. But first and foremost, Kathleen and I were just talking about bags and things, ways to carry your gear. You know, we carry a lot of stuff into the field. If you're sincere about this and really want to get good at it, you got to have options. You got to have filters and, you know, multiple lenses and tripods and all that stuff. Well, how are you going to carry it if you don't have a pack of some sort? So I would say invest in a good pack, and when you do, and there's a lot of them out there. I'm looking at a brand new one actually yesterday on the internet. If anybody wants to see it, I'll show it to them later. I have it on my phone, which is actually filming this class, so I'll have to do it on my computer. But anyway, you want partitions. These are made for cameras and camera gear. You want partitions that are easily adaptable to your gear. You want these straps on here are critical. I can't stress it enough. Make sure you have that little guy right there, because when you have gear on your back, it'll pull you back, and that will really strain your back and everything. If you have that strapped in nice and tight on the front, it redistributes the weight and it's very comfortable. So that's really critical. And also this, because you can lift the weight up onto your hip bones while you're walking. It takes some of the weight off your back. The top usually is like pockets for little things, filters, lens cleaning brushes, lens cloths, whatever. There's a space up on top for all that kind of stuff. And they have side pockets for filter wallets and all that. And mine actually has, this is my pack here, which is actually up here. If you want to see my pack, it's up here. There's a slot in the back for a laptop computer, which I adapted to put my tripod in. So I put my tripod in there, and I also put some other stuff you'll see in a minute. You want to make sure when you purchase a bag that is small enough to carry on airplanes. Really important. You do not want to put this through baggage at the airlines. Because if you lose it, if you're going on a workshop, you're done. You just can't, that's like a no-no. You have to keep this stuff close. And it's nice to be able to walk through an airport with this over your shoulder. You don't even know you have it. Your hands free. But take them on the airplane, put them under the seat or in the luggage thing upstairs there. And let's see what else. Lots of pockets. Make sure you got lots of pockets for little things, because we have lots of little things. Cameras. Let me just touch on that lightly. Everybody here probably has a camera or is thinking about it. I moved over into mirrorless about 3 or 4 years ago. And what I mean by that is right here, normally on a normal DSLR camera, you've got a mirror assembly. And the mirror flips up out of the way when the picture's being taken, and then it comes back down. Well, in that movement, you're jostling the camera for one thing. There's vibration, whether you feel it or not. There's vibration in the camera. And it also takes space to have that mirror assembly in there. So when they take the mirror out, you're looking right at the sensor, right there. That is the sensor. And the distance this way, width-wise, is a lot narrower because you don't have that mirror in there. So these things are like whisper quiet. They have a whole different sound than a mirrored camera. It's almost like an electronic shutter sound. It's different. It's really sweet sounding. I love it. And I think probably because that mirror's not having to go up and down every frame, it's probably going to be quicker in the long haul too. And I know most of the developments are going towards mirrorless now. So if you're thinking about a new camera, and people that don't have a camera yet and thinking about it, go mirrorless. Nikon, Canon, Sony, they all have them. And if you're in a DSLR camera and you have like a D850, I'm not going to tread on that, because that camera my wife's got one, and that thing is gorgeous. That thing is a drop-dead camera. That's got so much stuff on it that I would never say anything bad, and the pictures are gorgeous. So I'm not saying that if you have a DSLR, you're behind. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that most of the development is going towards mirrorless. So if you're going to purchase new, make sure you go that direction. L brackets. How many people use an L bracket in here? I'm seeing about half the people are using them. These are great for taking your camera. This goes around 2 sides of your camera, and they're custom built for each camera, so you have to order them specifically for your camera. They allow you to go from horizontal to horizontal very quickly. You just clamp it in, and it's just back and forth, and you'll see it in the film later. You'll actually see it me demonstrate it. That's one of the best things you'll ever buy. Lenses. Okay, let's talk about lenses. Generally, I would say the workhorse, the go-to lens for landscape photographers is the wide-angle lens. I think that's kind of undisputed for anybody who's done landscapes. And when I say wide-angle, what I mean is somewhere in the range between 11 millimeters and 24. That's kind of the range I'm talking about for most of the wide-angle landscape photography. This could be a fixed focal length in here. It could be a 24. It could be you can go fixed or you can go a zoom. I think the zoom makes more sense because they've really improved the quality of the zooms over the years. This, actually, I have a 24-70 zoom, which I'll show you in a minute. It's the sharpest lens in my bag by far. I love that thing. I'll talk about it in a second here. Let's see what else. Yeah, if you're gonna do the grand landscapes, and you're going to want to have a foreground, which you need in landscapes. I'm going to talk about that too. You need a foreground. The reason is it makes people feel like they're in the frame if you have a foreground. And to get that foreground, you got to have a wide angle to catch it, right? If you have a narrower lens, you're not going to catch that foreground. So the wide angle allows you to catch the foreground. And I would say this would be the second most important lens you should have in your bag, which is a 24-70. The 24 is the wide angle side of it, so you can shoot wide carrying this thing. And I think that's a really nice millimeter focal length for landscapes generally. Some of the best shots I've gotten, some of the prize winners have been at that 24 millimeter focal length. It's a really nice, comfortable length. It doesn't distort very much. They're very simple to use and frame, and you can get a lot in the frame, so that's a nice millimeter length. This 24-70 Canon, like I said, is the sharpest lens in my bag. It's phenomenal how sharp that thing is. If I'm just going to go out for a day, maybe Angie says to me, hey, that sunset is turning outrageous out there. We got to go to Bean Point. I'm going to grab this lens if I'm going light, and I'm going to take it with my Sony, and that's the one I'm going to take, because I can shoot the landscapes out there, the dunes and that kind of stuff, or if I want to come in a little closer on something, I've got a slight telephoto on there also. So that's a really nice, comfortable range, and you should have probably a wide plus that range in your bag as a essential. If you're going to adapt Canon lenses to a Sony camera like I do, that's kind of a long story I can talk about privately if anybody's interested, but you need brand A to brand B. You got to have something in the middle that'll communicate the electronic signals for autofocus to the lens. So these Metabones adapters do that, and that's a wonderful adapter. It's a smart adapter, and you put that in between your lens, your camera body, you're set to go. And that will maintain your AF capability if you're shooting birds and stuff, just FYI. At least mine does. Ball heads, get yourself a good ball head. You're using those things all the time. I ended up landing on, after a number of them, on really right stuff gear. This stuff is unbelievable. I mean, they mill these parts, each individual part, out of a solid brass block, and they mill this stuff to precision. So their gear is, I think, most of the pros that we've shot with are carrying really right stuff, tripods and ball heads. I'd say the large majority of them are. So this is a really good ball head line to get into. They have bigger ones and smaller ones. This is kind of an in-between. And also on the top, this little plate right here is an accessory. It fits over the top of the ball. You have to screw it on there, but that is the receptacle for the L bracket. So you swing that little wing open, the L bracket goes in, you swing it shut, and you're locked down. And then if you want to go from horizontal to vertical, you just unclip, spin your camera, put it down, lock it in, you're done. It's very simple and fast and precision. Wonderful, wonderful item to have. Batteries, all I want to say about that is if you're in the cold, which we generally are because we're shooting in sunrise, it can be cold here at sunrise, but you know, if you're shooting in the Rocky Mountains or you're up on Mount Rainier or something at 6 o'clock in the morning, it's cold, and your batteries have a short shelf life when it's cold. They don't last long, as most of you probably know. So I carry lots of extras, not lots, I have enough. I have 3 for my A7R4, and that seems to manage a morning or an evening. I do recharge in between shoots, always. I've learned to do that. But just carry an extra battery or 2 with you, and if you want to make sure they're going to be okay, you can keep them in your pockets close to your body so that they don't discharge their charge as readily. Okay, these are nice little wallets for batteries. You can put 4 of them in there. They're by Think Tank. And I find that when you're in the wilderness and it's cold and the wind's blowing and your hands are just like, you know, you can hardly grab anything, they're so cold. That's happened too, and you say, oh boy, I need a battery. Well, you start reaching for these little tiny small items, and your hands are like barely able to pick them up, and you drop them in the water, and you know, these are really easy to manage. You grab the whole wallet, and it's just easier to manage small things when you have a wallet, so those are nice to have. Tripods, you gotta have a tripod. If you're gonna shoot landscapes, sorry, you're gonna have to tripod because you're shooting in low light most of the time. If you're doing it right, you're shooting in low light. And so you're shooting longer shutter speeds, you're keeping your ISO, your native ISO of 100 or 50, whatever it is for your camera, and you're up at 8 seconds on some of your shutter speeds. You try and handhold it's not gonna happen, it's not gonna work. So you want to tripod everything with an exclamation point. That's critical to carry that thing. For landscapes, we're talking about landscapes now, not bird shooting or something else. I'm talking about landscapes in low light. So gotta have one. If you're gonna get one, I would spend a little bit extra and get carbon fiber because they're a lot lighter to carry. And they're also good in a saltwater environment because they don't have like metal parts, they're all plastic parts and carbon fiber. I like this type of a joint rather than the clip-on personally, just because of the cold hand situation. Again, sometimes the clips are a little bit hard on cold hands. And then also when I got mine, I took out the center post for 2 reasons. If you have your tripod fully extended and then put this up, that's a pretty wobbly platform to have your camera on. You're actually introducing movement to the camera without even knowing it, because that thing's just up there on that thing. So I took mine off, I just took it out, and that allows you to go down lower to the ground here. If that post was still in there, you couldn't do this. This, by the way, is a panoramic device, which normally wouldn't be in there, so this camera would be down on top of here. So you can get pretty low with this type of situation, and I do that a lot. I'm down on the sand shooting shells and all kinds of stuff. You can't do it if that post is there. It's a pain if it's there. I guess you could raise it up, but anyway, I just get rid of it and it's much easier. They actually sell the tripods now without them, and that's the way I would go if I was going to do it. Cards, all I want to say about that is carry extra cards. If you're in a workshop and you're shooting 40 megabyte files and you're shooting, you're doing like 4 or 5 shots to do an HDR or something, you're going to go through a lot of card space quickly. And you can run through a card pretty quickly. I go through 2 or 3 cards in a shoot pretty easily. I have 61 megabytes on the Sony, and so those files are large, and I shoot raw files. We'll go into that a little bit later. So the whole point is carry extra cards. I carry like 6 64 gig cards, and I carry them in this little wallet again for the same reason. With the cold hands, it's easier to grab one out of a wallet than it is out of your pocket or your bag. And I put my unused cards over here, and I put the used cards that already have files on them over here, so I know what's what, and I can see how many I have left of the cards that aren't used and so forth. This has a waterproof seal on the edge of it, so if you're shooting at waterfalls or whatever, you're not going to get water effect and corroding your cards and all that. It's just nice to have, you have a little weatherproofing on that, because we're out in the rain, we're out shooting waterfalls quite regularly on these workshops, and it can get pretty wet. Okay. Filters, I only carry 2 types of filters for landscape photography. I use a circular polarizer. Most of you people know what that is. If you have reflective surfaces in nature, like say you're shooting a stream and the tops of the rocks are wet, they're going to be reflecting a lot of light, and that light, that glare, doesn't give you the true colors underneath. So with the circular polarizer, you can remove a lot of that glare and you go down to true color, so your photos are more saturated, they're more beautiful. They're wonderful for like leaves in a forest. Leaves reflect a lot of light. Take the light off, you got green instead of this glaring surface. It can make your waterfall shots particularly really pretty because the glare comes off. You got these beautiful colors, so nice to have. The other filter I carry is the ND filter, and this gets into a little bit more advanced technique when you want to slow your shutter speeds down. For instance, if say you're shooting at 10 o'clock in the morning and you've got clouds streaming across the sky, say they're coming at you this way, and you want to get a cloud trail going through your shot, well, you have really still mountains in the foreground, or right here. Everything else is still, but those clouds are ripping, and you want to get that movement recorded. But it's 10 o'clock in the morning, and you can't get a slow enough shutter speed for that to happen. When you start putting these sunglasses, is basically what they are, over the end of your lens, and it allows there's a lot less light reaching your sensors, so that you can slow your shutter speeds way down. I find that the 4-stop and the 10-stop are adequate for all the stuff that I have done. I've had other ones that I never used, so I just don't even carry them anymore, but those 2 seem to really suffice. This one, you can already even see through it, it's so dark, but it does let light through, and you can get some magnificent, like say you're shooting a lake, with the dock kind of jetting out in front of you, and there's a lake. And you want that dock to be razor sharp, but you want that lake to kind of go real soft and smooth and silky. So you put that 10-stop on there, and you shoot like a 20-second or 30-second exposure or whatever you're going to do, and that lake just goes glassy. Even though it has waves on it, it'll go glassy. It's totally crazy what you can do. So those are the 2 I carry, and those are the only 2 types of filters that I carry, is the circular polarizer and the NDs. Computers, if you're in a workshop, a lot of people after a shoot, like say an evening shoot, will go back to their room. They'll sift through their photos in Lightroom, find the best one. They'll do a quick edit in Lightroom or Photoshop or both. They'll run it into their their photo files on their phone, and then the next morning when they're all having breakfast at 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock in the morning at a gas station and eating donuts and coffee and talking about the shoot for the day, they whip out their phone and say, look what I got. And everybody goes, oh man, because nobody else has even looked at theirs yet. You know, that's pretty cool. And you can't do that without a computer. You got to have a computer to edit. Other things, you can charge LED panels off these things. They have LED or USB ports, so you can charge iPhones, you can charge LED panels, all kinds of stuff off the side of the computer. You can look at the calendar for the next day and see what your target shots are and get those in mind. You can look at weather coming in, look at when it's coming in and when it's going to go, because the tail ends and the front ends of storms are usually great times to shoot for light. And also, some people like to post to social media while they're on these trips. You know, they want to show their friends what's going on in real time, so they post. And the computer obviously helps you do that. Lightroom, how many in this room use Lightroom now? Okay, about half, 2/3, something like that. Lightroom is the place that all the pros go, at least in the workshops we've been in, they all jump into Lightroom with their cards, and then they'll do some sifting and organizing into folders in Lightroom. It's a great organizing tool, and then they'll do some raw edits universally, and maybe even some more specific edits. But generally, they're not there long. They usually jump over to Photoshop and do their heavy lifting there. But as an essential, I would say every landscape photographer should be shooting raw files. I'll talk about this more in a little bit. And bringing them into Lightroom and just doing you can actually do all of your editing in Lightroom. There's some pros that just do that only now. Adobe is actually developing Lightroom more and more so that more people can do their full editing on Lightroom and just forget all the rest of it. It's becoming more powerful all the time. You get more specific with your edits and do more things. But there are some things you can't do unless you're in Photoshop. And if you're wanting to go all the way to the top of this thing, take Joseph's Photoshop class, because Photoshop is where you can really get creative. This is where the fun starts, where you can do the really creative artistic stuff. And we are going to talk about that some more. But as far as the essentials go, you should have Lightroom. Lens cloths, obviously you need them for your lenses to clean smudges and so forth. But the reason I put this on here was, this is kind of a cool trick if you're shooting a waterfall, and generally people get home and they look at their waterfall shots in Lightroom and they go, oh man, there's spots all over the thing. What happened? And they don't realize there's like water vapor droplets in the air hitting their lens while they're shooting. So this is a kind of a cool trick. You set up your camera, your tripod, you get all your settings set up, ready to go, put your timer on a 2-second delay or 5-second, whatever you want to do. Clean your lens off with the lens cloth, and then just drape it over the front of the lens. Hit the shutter button, and if it's a 2-second delay, you wait a second, and then rip that thing off of there, and it fires, and you got a clean shot. These are marvelous. If you're going to shoot waterfalls, this is one of the coolest tricks. Mark Adams taught us this in Oregon, and it works perfectly. You'll have a really nice, clean shot. And that could also probably be true around the surf. I don't know if we've gotten any problems with the surf down in Anna Maria. There's a water vapor down there that's in the air. It's hitting your lens, but anyway, just a little trick. iPhones, oh man. Flashlights on the trail. We're going to use these on Saturday to kind of illuminate our way down the trails. We walk out towards the beach. So bring your cell phones next Saturday. Great for photo pills, which I'll talk about in a minute. For GPS, getting to the location. On these sheets, you're going to have an address for where we're going to meet next Saturday. And if you just put that in your contacts and then click on it, your GPS will direct you right to where we are. Great for that. They're great for texting the workshop leaders and others in the workshop. Great for taking practice compositions. You know, I want to see how this looks, so boom, how does that look? Well, that's pretty good. Then you set up your camera and shoot. You can take quick compositions that way and see how it looks before you set up your big camera. They're great for compasses. If you get lost, you don't know which way you're going, you can use it as a compass. And I keep special camera settings for special circumstances in there, like if I'm shooting a full moonrise. You know, moons are tough to shoot because of the exposure issues, but I have settings that work perfectly for moons, so I keep it on my phone and can pull it up if I happen to be out there and I'm shooting that. And you can also check on this when the storms are going to break, because the storms, if you're out on the islands, and we did this last year, she and I were out on one of the beaches on Anna Maria, and the storm was like raging, and it was raining, and it was crazy, and it was cold, and so we sat in our little Sienna, and we're just like, do we really want to be here? Let's just go home. And then all of a sudden, the thing broke. We caught the back end of it moving north, And it was like, let's go. And we ran down there and the light was unbelievable. So if you see storms, that's not the time to go home. That's the time to pay attention, because some of the best light you'll ever see on the Gulf is right after a storm. I don't know why, but it's great. Don't forget your hat. You gotta have a hat. I went out, I don't know, a few weeks ago without my hat. I couldn't see my live view. I was miserable. And besides, the thing is that when you wear a hat in the outdoors, it keeps you warmer. We all know that. And it keeps the sun out of your eyes, and it also keeps you less sunburned. You know, if you're out in that Colorado air all day, you can get pretty red. You get pretty beat up by the sun. So take your hat. Don't forget a good hat. This one has an extra long bill on it for fishing, which is really great because you get a lot of shade. You can really see your live view with that thing. Okay, so if anybody wants a shot of that as a checklist, please feel free. And then we're going to quickly go through non-essential items, and then we'll take a break. I'm going to pause on this for a minute. We were in Zion one time, and there was a workshop that kind of was intermingling with our workshop. And this guy was so high on his gear. He was like bragging about his gear, his brand of gear. And he actually was insulting my wife, and it got bad. And I thought, he said, this guy, let's just move away from him. There's no point in interacting with this fella. Just leave him alone. The point is that all these camera brands, I don't care if you're shooting whatever it is, they're all making great gear nowadays. You can take terrific shots with any of the brands. Olympus, Sony, Canon, Nikon, they all have great cameras. That's not what's going to make you the best photographer. It factors in, but it's your knowledge that really matters. And you know, I like to use the example of Elton John sat down at a little honky-tonk piano. He could make that thing sound so good. So it's more about your knowledge and your skills than it is the brand of gear, okay? You know, I mean, there's a lot of Nikon shooters in here. I know that. I love Nikon. I sold Nikon for a while in a camera store when I was in school, and I shot it for years. I love Nikon, and Angie loves her Nikon. I went to Sony for other reasons that had nothing to do with quality. It had to do with shooting. I was following the path of another photographer in Colorado. I really liked his work, and that's my story, but it has nothing to do with the brand. They're all good. Just wanted to make that point. So let's quickly go through non-essential items. These are in my bag also, and I use them all the time, but they're non-essentials. And my point is, buy the stuff that's essential first. You know, spend your money on the stuff you gotta have to do the job right, and then you can start adding in this other stuff. And that includes Photoshop and Nik Color Effects and Luminar, and you know, those are things that are not essentials. They're nice to have. They can add to the secret sauce of your photos, but they're not essentials. These are non-essentials. These are ones that'll help you to do other things and maybe will assist you in some ways, but they're not essentials. Okay, so we're gonna go through these again, and I'll put this up again if you wanna copy it later. Okay, so we talked about the range of lenses. 11 to 24 would be a first really good lens to have for most of your work. 24 to 70 is the next step of range in focal length, and then this is the final one for landscape photographers. This pretty much fills the whole bill. It's 3 lenses, you can cover pretty much your whole range. 70 to 200, and the reason I like this lens is because you can do, say you're in the Smokies and you're shooting the mountains going away from you, and you want to compress those mountains in real tight and nice and beautiful. The 200 millimeter will allow you to compress at a distance. It also allows you a narrower field of view. So if you want to isolate something like a tree up on a rock or something, you know, this will allow you to have a narrower field of view and get that focal point really dialed in. So this would be the third one, but I kind of consider it non-essential because I have more on the wide angle range myself when I shoot. I like to shoot wides. This is my style. These do come in handy sometimes though, and even for macro shots, sometimes you can use these things for macro if you want to get in close to, I think I used this on the flamingos maybe at Jungle Gardens, I'm not sure. Anyway, that would have been probably was the lens I used because those birds were not cooperating. And anyway, so that's that. The reason I have this up here again is because I moved from an A7R2 to an A7R4. Now I got an A2. What do I do with that? Well, I thought, well, it's a great backup camera. It still works. I'll put that in the bag and away we go. So I have it in case. I dropped my lens, my camera, tripod, everything in Acadia National Park. I turned to see where my wife was, and when I turned, I heard this splash, and I thought, oh no, it's the middle of a workshop. Middle of the workshop in Acadia, and my camera is on the bottom of the lake. Well, that was not pretty, and my lens is fogged up, and it was terrible. It was like really scary. But I'm gonna make this point that I bought professional gear. This is professional grade gear, and it has better water seals on it. So if that's another hint I'll give you if you're gonna buy gear. who you're talking to, whatever rep you're talking to, say you'd like to get professional grade gear because they have better water seals in them. So if you have an accident, you're less likely to have a critical accident. I actually pulled that camera up off the bottom, and within a day it was fine. I went about shooting I only had one camera, so I just kept on shooting and everything was fine. But that's pretty frightening. So it's good to have a backup if you have one. This is probably one of the coolest items in your bag. If you're walking downhill on slippery roots in Rocky Mountain National Park, it just rained and those roots are like greased lightning, they're so slippery. And you're walking on them with camera gear on your back and you're walking downhill and you don't have walking sticks, you're in trouble. I'll just say that. But that's an extreme situation. But more so, if you're walking downhill with gear on your back, it is really hard on your knees. Believe me, it's hard on your knees, especially if you're walking 3 or 4 miles. These walking sticks, you can just lean into them and they take all that fear away. And if you start to go over, which I did in Colorado, Angie saw me, I went over, I actually went down so hard, I bent the walking stick into a C, which is the shape that it's still in. So I had to buy some more, but it saved me from going over the edge or whatever would have happened. These are wonderful. They'll save your knees, your back. They fold up, they go right in your bag in that slot where my tripod is. You'll see it later here. I just stick the sticks right in there next to the tripod, and then I use them all the time. I've only seen one other person ever use one of these, which amazes me because landscape photographers are always down on their knees. They're always down in the sand, always down on the gravel. And you're trying to do your settings and you're bending over and you're trying to get your settings correct, and it's like, whoa, this is painful. So I got a stool, it's a camp stool, for under 20 bucks. You get them online at Amazon has them there's a whole bunch of different ones. And they fold up straight so that you can put them right in there with those walking poles. And then when you'll see it in the movie later, I actually use this all the time. You get down nice and low, you set up your tripod and you're shooting right at eye level with your live view, getting nice low shots and your knees are not straining and you can concentrate on your settings and just enjoy it. I've only seen one other photographer ever use one of these, and it was a guy that saw me use it and he went out and bought one right away. He was an older guy. But that's a cool tool, and they're cheap. Hoodman loop, if you don't have a hat, this would save the day because you can put these over the live view, cut out all the ambient light, and you can actually give you a little magnification so you can really dial in your focus if you want to be really careful with your focus. They have a diopter ring on here so you can adjust it for your eyes. If you wear glasses, you can get it really dialed in. And a nice little lanyard so you can wear it around your neck. These are nice if you're getting really precise about Joseph and I were talking about macro earlier. It might be good for macro where you got to get your focus just completely dead on. This will help you do that. LED panels. This is what I use instead of a flash. I don't like artificial light, but there are times where you might want to do some fill light underneath an arch or something out in Arches Park, and you want to just, put some light up underneath an arch when you're shooting at night. These are great. They hold a charge for like 6 or 7 hours. They're crazy bright. They're like headlights. And you can also adjust them so that you can go full yellow or blue. In other words, you can adjust the color temperature to your taste on there. And you have, I think, a whole bunch of different settings on brightness too. So you can set it up and look on your live view before you ever fire a shot and see how it's going to look. With a flash, it used to be you'd have to kind of flash it and then look at it and see if you got it, and if not, make adjustments. Well, this you know ahead of time what you're going to get because you can see it. Pretty cool little item. They're like 60 bucks. You can get them at Johnson Photo Imaging. Could also serve as a trail light, as an emergency thing if you needed it, because they're really bright. Okay, we're finishing up this section shortly here. I hate these things. I absolutely hate these. I mean, there are times you've got to have them, but I hate these things because they never work when you need them. I don't hate them. I just don't like them. And in fact, I don't use them anymore unless I absolutely have to. And the reason is because these little connectors up here seem to get bent over time, and when you're in the middle of a shoot and it's time, you're gonna get that shot, and that thing's not working, that can make you nuts. It makes me crazy. And you're moving it around and bending it, and it's like, why am I doing this? Well, I finally learned in one of the workshops just to put the camera on a 2-second delay and do that, because what the aim you're after is to have that camera very still when it fires, so you're not pushing it with your finger. You don't want to touch the camera when it fires because it causes vibration, it causes your shots to be not sharp. So that's one of the reasons you would use this. Well, just do the 2-second delay, it has the same effect. You push the trigger, you step away, and it counts off 2 seconds and fires, and your shots are razor sharp. And you don't have to carry one of these things. If you forget it, it's no big deal. You always have the 2-second delay on your camera. There's a time where you would have to use something like this. Say, for instance, you wanted to shoot lightning towards the bridge down here, the Sunshine Bridge, whatever they call that big thing in the bay, Tampa Bay. People do this a lot. They just, they will push this button down here and then slide it, and it locks the shutter open, and you can lock it open for as long as you want on bulb setting for minutes. And just as lightning flashes, it creates a little lightning flash tracer on the film, and then you get more of it, and that's how they get those multiple lightning strikes on the shots, and you need this to be able to do that. Okay, let's see, pads on your tripod. You can see here I've got pads on this thing. The reason is when you carry that, if I were just to pick that up and carry it for a while on the trail, even though they're carbon fiber and not metal, those things can really dig into your shoulders if you're hiking, and it hurts. So I put 2 pads on 2 of the legs, and those 2 pads lie on my shoulder, and it's a nice soft cushiony. You don't even know you have that thing up there. I leave the other one free because it serves as a handle. It's almost like a suitcase handle to carry with, and also the tripod collapses more fully with the one that's not sheathed. So I just use 2. They come in sets of 3, unfortunately, but anyway. These are great. These are, you buy these in bulk from Amazon. They're alcohol-based. They clean lenses really well, and they dry immediately. Nice for cleaning lenses, great for cleaning eyeglasses if you wear glasses like I do. Any of the glass surfaces, these are terrific. Even your computer screens. They're kind of like the towelettes, but they are alcohol-based, so they dry almost immediately, and I always have those handy. I keep them in my office because I use them all the time for my glasses and the computer screens. Okay, we're finishing up non-essentials. Photoshop, for me, at this point in my journey, is a necessity because I learned how to use it now. I can't work without it, and I think Angie feels the same way now that she's using it a lot. And from there, you can put plugins inside of Photoshop that work as a drop-down within Photoshop. Joseph, I'm sure, will be talking about this, because I think some of the folks in the club use Luminar as a drop-down. I think I've seen that a lot. And it just, if you click on it, it drops it down, or you can go into that as a kind of a subset of Photoshop, and it works seamlessly within Photoshop. We were trained on this one out on Mount Rainier with a guy named Aaron Reed, and it's kind of like that extra little finishing touch that gives your shot the secret sauce. There's subtle nuance differences, but you can really do some cool stuff with these. I like them a lot, and we use them almost all the time. Headlamps, it just gives you light without having to hold anything in your hands. Your hands free on the trail. They put out a lot of light. Really good to have, especially if you have walking poles. Your hands are full. You can't carry a flashlight very easily. This is on your head, and you can direct it anywhere you want to look, and they're nice to have. They're not very expensive. So that's it, and we're finishing up this section. So takeaway again is, use the essential list. If you're just getting into landscapes and you want to purchase the gear, do those first. This next section is the dynamite stuff. I can't wait. I have been waiting to deliver this section for the last 3 months. I can't wait to unload this next section. This is, Dale, is right up your alley, I think. I haven't taken your class because I couldn't get in, but I'm going to take it. But this is probably going to dovetail a lot with what Dale teaches. I don't know, because I haven't taken his class, but this information in this section came from a fellow named Mark Adamus. You'll see him in a minute here. And we spent 10 days with him on the Oregon-California coast. It takes a year. You have to sign up a year ahead of time just to get into his workshop. That's how this guy is just in demand. And and the reason I lay that foundation for you is that he took us into a classroom like this for one of the days in the workshop, and he taught us some of the most incredible stuff. If you guys like the art side of photography, this is going to be right up your alley. So let's get started. I'm going to just do a quick show of hands on who in here is regularly shooting RAW files. Okay, we've got probably half. That's good. 2/3. For the benefit of the other third or half that aren't shooting RAW files right now, let me try and convince you why you should be doing that down the road. Every camera basically produces a RAW file. So when you push that shutter button, your camera produces a RAW file, which is kind of conceptually like a negative in film days. It looks terrible, but it's got all the information for the picture in it. RAW files don't look that great, but they do contain the full file of information. What happens with a JPEG is your camera as instructed by the camera engineers at the company that made your camera. The camera engineers decide what your photo is going to look like. And so they design into your camera, when you have it set for JPEGs, they design 24 different adjustments. I just heard recently at one of our meetings at the LWR DPC, 24 different adjustments, almost in milliseconds. And they're putting in more contrast, they're adding saturation, there's 24 adjustments. That's like a whole editing session on that raw file. And so when you see it on your live view, when you're reviewing your files, you're getting the adjusted file. And it's not only adjusted already, but it's you've lost a lot of information in that file because it's compressed. The JPEGs were actually, as I understand it, produced for the web. They had to shrink the file sizes down for the web, so they just get rid of a lot of the information in the file. And it's cooked in, it's baked in. So if you try and adjust a JPEG file after the fact, it's pretty tough. You don't have a lot to work with. It's rough. You can do some. We've seen some of the speakers, they'll adjust JPEGs slightly. But if you want to go to your own vision of what you want that file to look like, pardon me, and I do. I have visions in my mind before I ever start editing, or I want to take that file, and it's usually a long ways from where I start with that raw file. And you're going to see this later on. So if you want to be the artist landscape photographer that puts more of that special something into your photos that gets the wows, you need to shoot raw files, okay? And the reason is because you start with that file full of information and you develop it according to your vision. Instead of letting the camera engineers decide what it's gonna look like, you decide. And it's a world of difference, trust me on that. And we'll go through this, you'll see how that works. Okay, let's see if this thing is still working. Okay, the other question I want to ask is, how many in this room currently are shooting on manual most of the time? It's about the same number, about half. Okay, that's good. That's good. I'm glad to see it because I shot landscapes for the first 10 years I did it. I shot it on aperture priority because landscapes are primarily the most important setting is your aperture, because your depth of field in landscape photography, you generally want everything in focus in the frame, generally. Now, there are exceptions to that rule. We saw some yesterday in that class that Ron and I were in. They were using deliberate out of focus foregrounds, and it's like, what? It's a landscape. Most of the time you want everything in focus from 6 inches out to infinity. And that's a challenge, which we're going to talk about how to do that today, how to get that full range of focus. It's a challenge. But generally your aperture is the key to it. So if you decide, okay, I'm going to shoot on f/18, and that should give me the depth of field that I need for what I'm doing, well, that'll work for a while. But if you start getting down, Joseph and I were talking about getting really close to foregrounds. If you get down on top of a flower and you got a mountain behind and you're up close to that flower, it's pretty tough to get both that and the mountain in focus. There are ways you can do that, and you probably do want to do that, because if you have one or the other out of focus, you got issues. It can be a creative technique. Sometimes it works, but most of the time you want full sharpness throughout. Okay, so aperture priority is okay, but there is a limitation to it. Anytime you go to any one of these settings that are automatic settings like shutter priority or program or auto, a person can get pretty decent shots, for instance, just putting their camera on P, which is program. The camera kind of looks at the scene and says, okay, this is a landscape of a mountain. I kind of know how to do the settings for this shot, so it's kind of predetermines how it's going to put your settings together, and you can get some pretty decent shots. But the problem again is it's somebody else's view on what the shot should look like. It's not yours. So whenever you go to the automatic settings, you're relinquishing creative control. And this is the point I want to make. If you want to get super creative with your shots, and you should, because it's an absolute riot. It's so much fun. Honestly, the most fun part of this whole thing for me is not the camera and the shooting in the field. It's when I get to my computer with a raw file and can start editing. That's when the artistry begins, because it's sort of like an artist with a paintbrush. You're basically using your mouse instead of a paintbrush, and you're moving pixels around, you're changing the colors, you've got creative control with a raw file. You can do a lot. And so let's move on from that subject. So my point is, and I'll come back to this later, is if you're just starting out in landscapes, go to aperture priority and pick yourself a real nice small aperture when you're shooting landscapes so that you get everything in focus. And you can test your shot ahead of time if you go into your camera menu and you look for, let's see, it's called focus indicators, is what I call them, but they call them something else. Whatever's in red in your shot is in focus. So when you're adjusting your focal ring, or if you're using autofocus, whatever you do, it'll show you what's in focus. It puts focus peaking. Thank you. That's it. I forgot that. I always forget that. Thank you. Focus peaking. So that you go in your camera menu, look for focus peaking, and set it for whatever color you want, red, yellow, whatever. And then when you do your focusing, you'll be able to see where your focus is ahead of time. So if you're on f16 and you got something out of focus in your frame, maybe you go to f18 or f20. Go to a smaller aperture so you have more range of focus. You can see it ahead of time is my point nowadays. You didn't used to be able to, but now you can. And so you want to do that in landscapes. In manuals, down the road, as you advance in this thing, you're going to want to end up getting away from the automatic settings more and more and more, because you're taking more creative control back when you do that. You can do more with manual because you're adjusting all three of your critical settings, your aperture, your shutter speed, and your ISO. You're using them in combinations that'll get you creative effects you can only do if you do it yourself. So we'll talk more about that a little later. Okay, I love this stuff. I am so excited to deliver this. This is profound stuff. And this came right out of Mark Adamus's workshop. I got to lay two foundations before we talk about visual flow, because there's a reason you need to use visual flow, both in composing your photos and thinking about your settings, and also in editing. Visual flow comes into play in both of those. But you have to understand why you need it, and here's the reason. If you shoot a raw file, cameras don't see a scene, or they don't produce an image of a scene that look like what you see with your eyes. They fall short in these two key areas, in contrast and depth, and I'm going to go into both of those at length here so you'll understand the need to use visual flow to correct these. Okay, this is something that I had never heard about before, but it does make sense now that I've started using it. All the visual flow techniques I'm going to talk about really are addressing these two things, okay? And, okay, so this is a raw file, and believe it or not, this was actually exposed correctly, and you'll understand a little bit more about that in a minute, but the idea is you want to make sure you maintain all your information and your highlights primarily. You don't want to blow out your highlights. So this is exposed correctly. There's still information up there in those pixels, and I am going to explain that. But you get harsher contrast with your camera. In other words, the darks are darker than you would normally see them with your eye. Your eye would see all kinds of detail in these rock surfaces and over here, and you would see all kinds of detail in there. Your eye actually sees 15 stops of detail. Your camera sees 5. Those are called dynamic range issues. The camera doesn't see into the shadows and into the highlights like your eyes do. So if we get raw files that look like this, we've got to bring them back more towards what people expect to see in terms of contrast for them to linger on your photo and enjoy it. And I'm going to show you how to do that. Camera sees very little detail in the shadows in the raw files, except, it's important to note, the detail's there. The shadow details are there in a raw file. You just don't see them in the raw file. But they're there, and we're going to pull them out, and that's where I'm going with this thing. So, little detail in the highlights. The camera also records things more sharply than the eye sees. I didn't know this until I took this workshop. You actually get sharper images than the eye will see in nature with your camera. It's sharper. So you have to think about that. And what does that mean? How does that affect me in editing? What do I do with that? And also the contrast with the camera is uniform throughout. The eye doesn't see contrast that way. If an eye looks at a scene out in nature, usually contrast is much more pronounced in the foreground. You'll have more blacks in the shadows up front, and so if you know that, and then contrarily, or following that line of reasoning in the back, you'll have less blacks in the shadows, so there's less contrast, and that's the way the eye perceives depth and distance in an image out in nature. They expect to see contrast, high contrast up front, lower contrast in back. But The camera doesn't do that, it produces contrast the same throughout. So you have to adjust. If you want people to perceive depth in your photos, you've got to adjust the contrast. And we're going to do all this. We're going to show you how to do it. Okay, this next little film here is going to talk about dealing with these contrasts that the camera produces unnaturally. Hi, I'm Doug with Blunt Photographic, and today we're looking at how to set your landscape exposure for very high contrast light situations like this one. I was actually sitting on this hillside trying to set my exposure to accommodate the bright sun and the shadowed flowers all at the same time. And a workshop leader said to me, "I can see you're having some issues with exposure." So he said, do me a favor, expose for the brightest area in your frame and I'll show you something really important. Trust me. So, and I knew from experience that if I did expose for the bright area around the sun, that most likely the foreground and the point in the background would go dark, if not black. And that wouldn't be good. In fact, in the film days, we would have thrown that photo away. So I did what he said, and I exposed for the bright part of the sky. And then I handed him my SD card, and he said, "Follow me." Went up to his dusty old Toyota truck, and he pulled out his MacBook Pro, stuck the card in, pulled up Lightroom, and he said, "Okay, now I'm going to show you something really important." And the next thing he did really changed my thinking altogether about exposures. He just took the exposure slider and slid it to the right around 3 stops. And that's 3 stops of light on your camera. Don't pay any attention to the sky right now. I'm just looking at the shadowed areas. And you'll notice that in these areas where there was heavy shadow, there's now detail. And the most important part is there's no grain. There's absolutely no grain in there whatsoever, even after bringing up 3 stops of light into the shadows. That was a total eye-opener for me, because it meant that I could start exposing for the highlights in a scene in high contrast situations like this and pull up 3 stops of shadow detail without any grain. Wowzer, what an epiphany. So I'm going to show you now how to, what I would do just to put a couple quick edits on this photo to bring the general exposure in line with what I like to see. So I learned a couple more things that day as well, that after 2012, the major camera brands were using sensors that gave a lot more exposure latitude into the shadows. You can see the chart here. It shows the major brands and how many stops of detail you'll have in your shadows before there's any grain at all. That's really good to know, because again, you can expose for the highlights then, and then just when you get into post later and you do your editing, you just bring up the shadow detail and still maintain your highlights. That's extremely important. The second thing I learned that particular day was that you will rarely find yourself in a landscape photography situation where you've got contrasty light and this system won't work. With that 3 stops of latitude on my Sony, I've had no issues whatsoever shooting in a high contrast light and then being able to recover shadow detail later on in post. Okay, so I'm going to talk about this a little bit further. Most of you in the room have seen a histogram before. There may be some that haven't. The histogram basically shows how your pixels are distributed from the darkest pixels to the lightest pixels, right? And then you got the middle ground here. One thing you have to keep in mind in landscape photography is you want to stay off the right wall of the histogram. You don't want pixels up on that wall, and the reason is those are completely white pixels. They have no information in them to recover. So if you just aim your camera at a scene and you expose for maybe the trees in the foreground, and your sky is brighter, obviously, like it always is, and it's up on this wall, when you get your raw file to look at, you'll have no information at all in the sky. All your clouds will disappear. It'll just be what they call a bald sky. That's a really big no-no. My brother's an art director, and I remember he used to just slay me when I'd show him my photography. He'd say, "Your skies are terrible, get it away from me." And I learned in a hurry, you've got to have natural detail in the sky. So what I'm trying to say here is, on the histogram, you do not want pixels up on that wall. So you adjust your exposure and push those pixels to the left so they're not on this wall. You want to come up to the wall, but you don't want to be on it. And on my camera, I shoot with the live view primarily, so I have it set up in my camera menu that the display shows a histogram. And this is the way the pros do it, by the way. This is the way they do it. Then they'll look at the shot if they're on manual, they'll have their settings and they'll be adjusting shutter speed, aperture, and ISO, and they're watching that histogram. And if anything hits that right wall, they're pulling it back. They're pulling one of those three back to get pixels off of that wall, because those are unrecoverable details out there. It's pure white. If you try and change them, they go gray, and it's a really awful looking gray. It's terrible. And we call these clipped areas. There's a number of names for that. Hot, that's a hot area, or it's clipped, or it's blown out. Whatever you want to call it, that's a no-no. So I suggest that you folks go into your camera menus, and for your display, your live view display, make sure that one of the options is a histogram, so you can look at that before you fire and just make sure you're not up on that wall. That's critical. Now, I will say this too, that when you're shooting in a scene like I was shooting out on the Oregon coast, looking out over those sea stacks, you're looking out into some pretty bright light. You're aiming right at the sun, which you probably shouldn't look through your eyepiece. If you're looking at the sun, do not be looking through your eyepiece at that sun, because it can really hurt your eyes. Live view is a little different. It's a little safer. But so in that situation, you got to pull that exposure off of that wall, keep pulling it back. That's what I mean by exposing for the highlights until there's nothing on that wall. Well, that means that your other pixels are going to be, into the dark zones. Don't worry about it, because you have 3 stops. This is one of the most profound things I ever learned. It changed my photography immediately, because all you have to worry about is the brightest area of your frame. You set your exposure for the brightest area of the frame. Make sure you don't have anything up here. And whatever happens with the rest of the pixels, you don't worry about it, because if you go into a raw editor, you'll be able to pull those shadows up. That information's in those shadows. You just can't see them in the raw file, but they're there, as I just demonstrated. And that actually is the only way I shoot now. It makes exposure a lot simpler, because all you do then is you look at a scene, you say, okay, where's the brightest area of the scene? And you just keep, you pull up your live view, you look at your histogram, you just keep pulling it back until you're off that wall, fire it, and then you do your adjusting later in Lightroom and Photoshop, that type of thing later. Okay, that's really important. You don't want to be blowing out areas. Those are clipped areas. They look terrible when you see them in a picture. We saw a picture yesterday of a lady who had a collar on, and she had the left part of her collar was really bright. And I don't know if you'd seen a histogram of that, you probably would have seen some of this. I don't know for sure, because these screens don't exactly produce what we're seeing on our computers. You guys know that. But anyway, enough on that. That's really important. So have your histogram up when you're shooting and look at it, and make sure that you do that, because that's really important. So, okay, so I'm shooting out at the sunset. We were fortunate enough to be able to look out towards the Gulf. This is west, so we get sunsets out here. And we can see the sunsets every night across this water. We have fresh water, and then we have salt water, and you get some really marvelous things. Well, anyway, I was shooting out the window, and You see all these clouds up here in the sky, all that wonderful detail and all that? You want to see that. Well, if I just expose for this scene, it looks like everything's kind of okay here on the exposure, if you just look at it, but look at that sky, it's pure white. That's a no-no. And look at the histogram. You see it over here? Okay, I'm going to share one more trick with you guys. And this is really simple. It simplifies everything about exposure. You just expose for the brightest area, which in this case is right here. Make sure you're not up there. If you got that managed, you'll be fine. Just trust me on that one. It works that way. So if I shot this, you'd end up with that white sky. And here's another thing. These are called, I'm going to have to ask Susan Bosang again. Zebras. What is it? Zebras, or they call them something else too. Blinkies. They call them blinkies. That's the term you hear a lot in the field. These diagonal lines in here indicate overexposed areas that will be up here on the right wall on the histogram. So you can also turn your blinkies on in your camera menu, or it's actually the zebra setting, like the animal zebra. Make sure they're turned on so that when you're exposing, if you have diagonal lines going through your shot, you got to keep adjusting one of these three things down here, your shutter speed, aperture, or ISO. And I generally use this one. I use shutter speed for my, and I'll go into that more in a minute. I keep turning this so that those disappear. And you'll see me do this in the film. When we do the field shoot later, you're going to see me looking at those blinkies. I use them a lot because it's a quick indicator to see if you're overexposing or you're blowing out your highlights. Okay, so here's a raw file. You saw it before, and this is post-editing. You can see that detail was in there. Look at all that detail. And that's not grainy. I mean, it might be slightly grainy, but it's not terrible. I don't think it's grainy. I mean, if you look at it, generally it looks pretty good on my screen. It's nice and sharp. But anyway, remember that most cameras have 3 stops generally today of exposure latitude, 3 full stops of light into the shadows where you can pull detail before you start getting grain. That's really important. Okay, so moving on. Okay, so the takeaway on contrast is you want to always expose for the highlights. Just remember histogram. Stay off that wall. So you don't blow out your highlights, and then later on in post, even though your shadows look dark, you just pull the shadow slider to the right, I guess it is. Anyway, you just pull up your shadows and they'll come right in beautifully without that grain, and you'll say, wow. I didn't even know that was possible until this guy showed it to me. He was like, what? Because all those years I've been trying to balance between the bright sun and the foregrounds, and it just was a nightmare. It is hard. Okay, so here's the second issue with cameras, okay? Cameras see things differently, remember? The second issue is that you're shooting it on a 2-dimensional surface here, right? You don't have 3 dimensions, so you're already at a disadvantage when it comes to spatial relationships and depth and all that. It looks flat. And the other thing is when people, Mark Adam has taught me this, when people view a scene in nature, they generally focus on one thing, and as they're moving, they focus on another, and their brains calculate spatial relationships that way by refocusing on different things as you're moving through the scene. Well, cameras don't move. So you completely lose that spatial relationship in photography. It's flat and it's distracting, and one of the reasons is because you don't know where to look here. It's like, what's going on here? You know, there's nothing standing out. Where's my center of interest, my focal point, where is it? You know, all those issues come into play. So we have to recreate depth in this 2-dimensional image, and I'm going to show you how you do that. You use visual flow to do that. So this is what the camera sees, and with visual flow, now your eye pretty much knows where to go. In other words, you're building a pathway for the eye to go right up that leading line there to this promontory here where that gondola house is. At least I feel that way. I mean, you may feel differently, but we use techniques to separate layers so that, there's more contrast in these layers. This is a little bit brighter. There's leading lines in here leading up to this bright spot here. So we're going to go into this in detail here in a minute, but I just wanted you to see that this is actually, it creates a little bit more feeling of depth than this one does. It looks kind of flat. And part of what we do with the visual flow is we guide the viewer to the focal point. We simplify a complex natural scene and we show them where the focal point is. We just basically help them go right to the focal point. And there's ways that we do that, which is what we're going to talk about here. Okay? So without depth being put back into an image, the scene looks unnatural to the viewer. If it looks unnatural, they're not going to want to look at it. They're going to turn away and go to something else, and you've lost them. So the big takeaway is cameras produce files that lack normal contrast. Again, it produces contrast the same all the way throughout. The eye doesn't see things that way. And normal depth. And so we use visual flow to fix these things, and I'm going to go into that. And this stuff is dynamite, I will tell you. It's wonderful stuff. So our job, basically, as landscape photographers, and that's what we're studying today, is how to help the viewer in a scene comprehend depth into the image, right? So it looks natural to them, holds their interest. And also, we want the viewers to linger. You know, that's a big part of what we're trying to do here. So, and we want them to feel spatial relationships like they're in a natural scene. So we recreate that literally through editing, and we use some compositional techniques also for that to happen. So, okay, so here we go. So the way to understand how a person looks at a photo, looks at an image, looks at a painting, or a scene for that matter. But in photography, the eyes generally enter, and I'm sure Dale, you could probably teach this part of it, comes in the bottom part of the photo on the lower left, I think it is. They actually put meters, some kind of metrics on the eyes that track where the eyes go when they look at a photo. And they've determined that the eyes come in, they usually follow leading lines up into, and they go to obviously a focal point, but there's more to it than that. So the eye would expect to see as it comes in, the eye is going to travel from the darker foreground, more contrasty foreground, back to a more well-lit area. The eyes pretty much will go to the brightest part of the scene. Generally, the eye will go right to the bright part of the scene. It's just a pathway right to the bright part. So we actually build a pathway for the viewer by creating a little bit more darkness in here up to the light, darkness to light, darkness to light. Comes in every direction and puts your eye right back in here, right? That's where the eyes go. Whether you know it or not, it's almost a subconscious the way the eye moves, but that's what happens. And we want to be able to build this visual pathway, this visual flow for the eye to know where the focal point is. If you know, some people just see a beautiful scene and they shoot it. Like for instance, in the whole rainforest, it's one of the most complex ecosystems in the world. There's stuff everywhere, and if you just shoot it, without having a center of interest in mind, it's just stuff everywhere. It's really complex. It completely confuses a viewer, so when you're shooting in a situation like that, you've got to build a visual pathway for that viewer to go back to the center of interest. You guide them there, and that's what we do with visual flow technique. So it's dark to light, it's cooler colors to warmer. You see the blues out down here? And in editing, we'll actually add blues into the shadows in the foregrounds to add cooler tones in the foreground, so the eye will move from the cool up to the warmer tones. Just naturally moves cool to warm, okay? We also know that the eyes expect to see higher contrast in the foregrounds than they do in the back. See how it's soft it gets back here, more diffuse? That's the way the eye would normally see it, so we build that in. And in fact, Mark Adamus, I don't know if this is something that is right or wrong. I don't put a value judgment on it. I kind of like both ways, but he actually adds fog and mist into his photos and clouds and all kinds of things to diffuse backgrounds, to build these layers of light and dark and light and dark, which gives the feeling of depth back into the photo. He'll actually add clouds and fog and all kinds of stuff. In fact, that's his favorite part of editing, is the atmospherics. I'm not going to go off on that tangent too much right now, but so we would put more contrast up front here. These are, there's more black in the shadows on these fronds of grass in here than back here. It gets softer, there's less black, less contrast. And another thing that the pros will do is they'll add diffusion. As you go back further in a photo, they'll actually add blur and light. You'll see this later. They'll add diffusion to the backgrounds because it gives a more natural view. If you're in the mountains and you see a mountain behind that, a mountain behind that, what happens is the mountain up front is kind of like has more contrast. And you go to the second one, it's a little bit less contrasty, and the last one is almost, it's soft like this. And that's the way the eye expects to see it. So we create that with the visual flow technique. Also the eye expects to see sharper stuff up front and less sharp in the back. So we might, put some specific sharpening in up in the front of an image on purpose, because the eye expects to see more detail up here than it does back in here, more back in here. So you can actually layer your sharpness back through a photo deliberately, on purpose, so it builds that spatial feeling, of depth into the photo. And these guys do this. We watch these guys actually do this stuff. Also, large to small. Okay, here's a big one. My brother, who, as I mentioned, is an art director, he drew for television commercials for his whole career, said when he was in art school, the most important thing they ever taught him was you got to have large objects in the foreground, smaller objects, smaller, and smaller yet. He says, and they would start with a blank canvas, so they had to create everything from scratch. But what a lot of photographers do, and here's the point, they'll stand up and they'll forget this whole bottom section here. In other words, this will be the bottom of their frame right here or up here, and they'll just shoot from this back, and they totally forget about all this. Big mistake. Because there's a lot of reasons for that. Well, one of the big reasons is that when you put a foreground in like that, and this is the reason, Nancy, for wide angle lenses, why you'd want one, is because the wides pick up that foreground for you. You don't have to aim down to get it. It naturally picks up that foreground. And you want that because what happens with a foreground like that is it makes the viewer feel like they're actually inside of the photo. It's a big difference. If I can't do it, but if you just look from here on up at the photos, it's kind of interesting. But when you add this, you feel like you're there. You feel like, man, I'm standing right behind that grass clump. I'm probably getting my feet wet. It adds another layer of that special sauce to a landscape photo, that foreground. And so a lot of times when the pros walk into a scene, they're not looking so much for this. They've already researched, they know this is going to be here, but what they're looking for is this. They're looking for a really cool foreground to put in there in that photo. And they'll walk around. I saw this guy in a video the other day do it. He had this beautiful rocky thing down in the southwest he wanted to shoot, and that was his center of interest. But he walked around for like an hour around this thing, the perimeter of it, trying to find like little cactus and rocks and formations in the foreground, still life, so to speak, in the foreground to add interest to the center of interest. Big part of landscape photography is this, and that's why the wide angles are so important. That's it right there. Okay, so the eye follows leading lines, so we look for leading lines. They're pretty hard to add later in editing, but when you're composing, you should be looking for these lines. There's a whole bunch of them in here. There's, this line coming in here. You got this major kind of S-curvy thing going back. It takes your eye right up that path, right back to that bright, warm, beautiful area back there. Your eye just naturally goes up there. And so we compose that way on purpose, and then we edit for colors with cooler colors to warmer colors. And we're going to do this on Saturday when we go out there, when we're walking out towards the beach. The sky over the Gulf is going to get warm. You're going to get warmer colors, and you're going to have cool colors in the foreground because you're actually in kind of almost like a tunnel of trees and bushes as you walk in. So we would add more blue into the shadows in the foreground. They'll naturally be there to some degree, but we actually accent them sometimes to push the eye towards the warm colors and the bright areas. You're leading that eye back to that center of interest. This is visual flow. It's creating a pathway for the viewer. Internal frames, I don't have one on this one, but an example of an internal frame that we look for when we're composing is like maybe if this had a limb off a tree or something over the top here that just naturally kind of framed this in. Or you could have a rock here or something that just naturally pushes the eye back towards the center. They're called internal frames, and we will have one on Saturday. We'll have a beautiful internal frame arch in the tree with a gulf kind of underneath it in the hole. So there's some great compositional stuff we'll see out there on the beach on Saturday. And then lastly here, transition layers. Okay, again, it goes back to the problem with depth and three-dimensionality not being present naturally in these photos. So the pros will, in their editing, will look, first of all, when they're composing, look for situations where they have dark, bright. Those are transitional layers, and those transitional layers naturally feel to the eye like, oh, there's a lot of different layers here. It looks like depth. And as I said before, these landscape guys that are really on the top of their game, they will actually add layers of like diffuse clouds and fog and stuff in there to create another layer to give the image of depth. And it's pretty easy to do actually with a clone stamp tool. It's very simple to do. But anyways, so I'm going to put this up. This information, I'm going to take a minute here because I'd like everybody to have a copy of that. This is the heart of, this should inform both your composing, how you think about setting up a shot, and also your editing later when you start doing color contrasts and working with colors and working with layers and so forth. You'd want to think about these things because this is what the eye feels comfortable with, what it expects to see in nature. And if you create these things into your images, the viewer will linger and will feel a lot more comfortable with the images, and you'll get more wows when you. Let me just tell you, when I took Adamus's class and came back and I started learning this stuff and kind of digesting it, and I started using it in my photos, my responses went through the roof. I mean, I can tell you, this will change how people look at your photography. It's a mystery in some ways, but the artists have been doing it for hundreds of years. It just, maybe Dale, you talk about this in your class. It's probably a lot of the same stuff with leading lines and all that, but this is really important if you're going to be an artist in what you do and not just do snapshots. Everybody got what they needed there? Okay. Okay, so we're going to go into some examples of how painters were using visual flow technique that you just copied 400 years ago. Rembrandt knew, I don't know how he knew it, I don't know where he learned it, but he knew that the eye would move to this center of interest because of that dark vignetting, because of the dark to the light, because of the cooler colors up to the warmer colors, the leading lines up these legs of people, just pushing the eye towards the center. Your eye doesn't even have a chance with that shot, that painting. It eventually is going to end up right here. And it's kind of cool how that works. You know where to look, just instinctively you know. And Rembrandt knew that. I mean, he deliberately put those heavy vignettes on the edges and used a lot of dark colors to push the eye towards the light and all that. He knew that 400 years ago. So my brother, that I mentioned, who was an artist, I was talking to him about this one day, and he says, oh yeah. I thought I was sharing something interesting with him that I'd learned from Mark Adamus. He says, oh yeah, we call that Rembrandt light. And all the artists know that. It's just, we all know that. That's the common technique for us to use. So I thought that was kind of cool. That's 400 years ago. Here's 200 years ago. A guy named Alfred Bierstadt. He was a painter of American great landscapes out west. He's actually a Dutch or German fellow, I forget. But anyway, he was famous, and he has these big, beautiful paintings of the western landscapes that are hanging in some of the great lodges in the national parks in America. I think, Rick Shaw, you might have seen one of these out there if you're in Grinnell Point. I think they have one of these hanging, it's like 20 feet long in the dining room. And these are beautiful, beautiful paintings. Well, if you think about it for a minute, this is 200 years ago, okay? This guy's using all the techniques I just described to you. If you think about it, this guy started with a canvas that had nothing on it, and he literally created the whole scene. That's far beyond what we're doing. We're enhancing what's there, but this guy started from scratch out of his head and developed this visual flow. Man, you just go woof. And he was a master. You know how we talked earlier about how the human eye sees things more sharply and more contrasty up front? Well, he put a lot of contrast in up here. Look at this back here. That's like total diffusion. And that was on purpose. He could have done this up there, but he didn't. A lot of photographers will leave their photos with this as sharp as this, but that's not the way the eye expects to see it. The eye expects to see diffusion as you go back. And so he built this marvelous, beautiful diffusion. Now, I will tell you, the guys that we shot with, and these are top level people that run workshops, and they charge through the nose for these workshops, rightly so, because they're pathfinders. They deliberately put this diffusion and bright, beautiful light into their backgrounds in editing. They build it. They literally will push light into these photos, create light, create diffusion. They use the blur tool in a major way to Gaussian blur to blur these backgrounds on these mountains and stuff, because they understand that it's going to go, the eye is going to expect sharp to diffuse, dark to light, all that stuff we talked about, large to small. Again, large to small, smaller, high contrast to lower contrast, and even more low contrast. See how it pushes that eye back? It's just a natural flow right up to those big, beautiful mountains. This guy was a master. And I'll share with you, when we took Mark Adamus's class, and he sat us down in that motel room for a day off the field on that 10-day workshop, he used Alfred Bierstadt to teach what I'm teaching you today. This guy knew this 200 years ago. So this is not new stuff, it's not new knowledge. It's just that it hasn't, at least in my circles, hadn't been talked about very much. I'd never heard this stuff before. But the guys that understand visual flow, from those things that we talked about, all those different methods of pulling the eye towards that center of interest, or pushing the eye, or leading it, whatever you want to say it, those methods are time-proven methods that work, and they use them, and they deliberately edit towards that. So when I talk about a vision on a photo, you have a raw file, and you have, this may say this is a photograph, and these mountains are pretty sharp back here. They're really contrasty because that's the way they're captured by the camera. If knowing what I know, I would come in here and put some more light and diffusion into that background on purpose, deliberately, for this very reason, because of this beautiful, this little lane of traffic going right back. You know where to look. There's no confusion about this image at all. You start down here with these animals, and it goes whoop, right up this little waterfall, right up to this beautiful light up here. That's mastery. I don't know what else to say. It just is. Okay, so now we're going to talk about modern day photographers and how they're using visual flow in their photography. This guy is Max Reeve. He's from Switzerland. He's actually a Dutch fellow who now lives in Switzerland and runs workshops. He's a friend of Mark Adams's, and they think a lot alike. And this guy, there's no missing the focal point here. I mean, all those things we talked about, dark to light, leading lines to the subject. Here's this beautiful glacier pointing at the sky, dark to light again, cool to warm. Just goes on and on. And they use all these techniques in their photographs. They shoot for it, they edit for it, and they end up with these photos that are just like, whoa, that's what you're looking for, right? Is that, wow. And I studied this later because Angie and I were in Switzerland with Sean Bagshaw about 2 months ago. That was an absolutely outrageously gorgeous place. Oh my word. Well, it turns out, I realized after I saw this, what he did is he set his tripod up here on a camera, or his camera on a tripod rather, probably with a remote, like a Bluetooth remote like Joseph and I were talking about, and ran out to this promontory and, click, he got a selfie, a landscaper's selfie. And I looked at this, and I looked at it, and I thought, we were in this very same spot, because that's the Matterhorn back there. We were actually staying in a hotel right up here, looking down on Gornegrot Glacier with the Matterhorn in the background. But this was so dramatic, the way that he's developed this photo, that I didn't recognize it for the first 2 months I saw this. See, that's all about that vision I'm talking about. If you understand where you want to go with a photo because you've learned these things, what a great photo should look like, using visual flow to make the photo really simple. There's nothing complicated about this photo. Your eye goes boom, right to him. There's all these, like a triangular pathway going right to him, leading lines. By the way, triangles are very powerful in compositions, very powerful. Whenever you can put triangles into he's got a bunch of them in here, but, and also converging leading lines like this glacier, kind of pointing up. Those are really powerful leaders to the center of interest, to the focal point. And those are all tools these guys use on purpose, and that's the point I'm making. You can't do this if you're shooting JPEG. You need to think this stuff through, shoot raw files, and then develop towards your vision of how it should look. You're not going to get this on a JPEG. I don't think. Maybe you would. I doubt it. It'd be pretty hard to do, but okay, so moving on. This guy has 1.5 million followers. When he posts on Instagram, he gets like 40,000 hits overnight. It's crazy how good this guy is. So the takeaway is, this is not new knowledge I'm sharing with you. It's not Doug Blunt knowledge. It's not really even Mark Adams knowledge. He's only 45 years old or something. I mean, these guys were doing this 400 years ago. It's not new knowledge. It's old knowledge that works, that people are kind of talking about more now, which I'm glad, because this goes to the art side of photography, which I love. That makes it really fun for me. So this is Mark Adams. He's an absolute pioneer. Like most of the great names, so-called in landscape photography, know this guy by first name. They know all about him, and most of them are actually teaching techniques that Mark developed, both in compositions, in using lenses, and in developing. He's just, I don't know what else I can say about this guy. He's the top guy. That's number one right there. I could go on and on about him. So let me talk about visual flow. This is the guy that taught us visual flow. And you can see it all at work here. Okay, you've got cool colors to the warm, right? Your light kind of goes up towards the warm.
You've got lots of contrast up here, not so much back in here. In fact, he's probably putting diffusion on this mountain back here on Mount Rainier. I'm sure of it, actually. There's more diffusion back in here. He may have even, if these clouds came in here, he may have even taken them all the way across to give the that transitional layer look. You know, you've got flowers, trees, fog, mountain behind that, and then sky. So you've got like 5 different layers of transitional layers that give that image depth. And those are on purpose things. I want to repeat that over and over. They do these things on purpose for a reason. Is to direct the eye back where they want you to go. They're tour guides. They're giving your eyes a tour. They're basically letting you know where you need to look. Okay, so this guy is Max Rio. I talked about him earlier. He's a pretty young guy. I've watched a number of his editing tutorials. I've spent hundreds of hours actually studying his editing tutorials because I like his work a lot. He's a true artist. This guy works with colors and things in a way that are just, some of the editing techniques are so far out there that it takes you have to rewind like 5 times just to see what he's doing, to figure out what he's doing. They're so advanced, just crazy stuff. But, again, I want to reinforce these visual flow techniques that they're using. Obvious leading lines. He obviously set up there for that reason because you got these lines pushing towards these mountains back here. You've got the darker colors and all those blues and contrast and sharpness up here in the rocks, going to smaller rocks, a little bit less sharp, and a little bit more diffusion back here, not quite as sharp. Blue colors over the orange, cool to warm, dark to light. You've got internal framing with these trees and these trees. You've got a frame to look through to look at the center of interest back here. That's deliberate. What else? There's probably a whole bunch more I'm missing here, but these guys think that way all the time. They're looking for this stuff and they edit towards it. They probably know what they're going to get as a final edit even before they pull the trigger on the camera. These guys are they're just so into this whole thing that, anyway, it's mastery. I just love studying from these guys because they can teach us so much. Aaron Reed is the guy we shot with on Mount Rainier National Park a couple years ago. Funniest guy you'll ever meet, total character. But look at all the stuff he's got going on, large to small, obviously. There's spatial, distance, depth. That's an obvious thing. You got leading lines with the rocks. Triangles are powerful, we talked about that. Really powerful elements in composition. He's using rule of thirds here, He's on that top line of the rule of thirds. He's got dead center, which I kind of like. I like the symmetry of it, but that can be changed up too. Cool, obviously, see the blues in here? I don't think you can see those blues, but there's blues in here. And then look at these bright, warm colors. So it's blue to red, blue to orange, cool colors to warm colors. Your eye just goes, poof, knows where to go. Not complicated. Rena, this is Sean Bagshaw. You've probably seen him before, but this is the guy we were in Switzerland with. He has his own YouTube channel, teaches Photoshop, teaches luminosity masking. And he's a really nice guy. We spent, 8 to 10 days with him in Switzerland. Good guy. The reason I'm putting these people up is I want to show you that all these guys are using the visual flow, right? And you're beginning to see, I'm sure, a lot of what I'm talking about here. Got leading lines up to the light, right? Cool colors to warm, dark to light. You got internal framing with these trees. You got, sharp detail, high contrast, lots of black in the shadows up to really diffuse back here. It's the same things over and over again is my point. These things are applicable to every single photo you're going to take. They're universal rules that work, and these guys know that. Oh, by the way, let me go back one. Photo Cascadia is a group that Sean started out in the Cascade Mountains of Washington. There's about, 9 professional photographers that kind of joined in consortium. Names like Erin Bobnick, she's a really big name. Chip Phillips, Kevin McNeil, David Cobb, Adrian Klein, and Zach Schneff. They're all workshop leaders and kind of world known, and they all got this consortium together and started a website called photocascadia.com. Cool website to go into because they write blogs on professional landscape photography. They give you a lot of insights into what it's like to be in their world, shooting at their level and teaching and everything. So cool website if you would want to check it out. This is Joseph Rosbach. Angie calls him Joey to his disdain. He doesn't like it, but anyway, he's a really nice guy from the Northeast. He does workshops all over the U.S., and we've learned a lot from him. We went to Zion with him and also Ricketts Glen, Pennsylvania. He does like short workshops. They're really condensed. They're like 2-3 day workshops. He hits it hard and then you're done. It's not like the 10-day things where you're worn out when you're done. And he does some really great venues, really terrific. So back to a visual flow, you're seeing these leading lines going up here, dark colors up to those warmer tones, large to small. He's got kind of almost that internal framing with these trees over here pushing your eye towards the center. Darker vignetting on the sky, and also these guys will use their blues a lot to push the eye towards the middle. They'll desaturate and de-illuminate the blues so that they're not quite as attractive. Blue is a very attractive color for the eye, but there's not usually a whole lot in the blue skies that people want to see. So they'll take the saturation out of the blues and they'll also bring the luminosity down on them. So they take on a little bit darker, almost like a grayish blue cast. So you're not wanting to look there. There's nothing here to look at, so it pushes your eye more towards the light. That's one of the tools they use a lot. This fog line, again, you get transitional layers between light, dark, light, so you get those wonderful layers, and those are really important for depth. Okay, let's see. Mark Metternich is another guy. If you want to study Photoshop, there's somebody in here that's done the Lightroom thing, and they want to beef up their skills and really learn Photoshop at an artistic level. I'm not just talking about learning tools, I'm talking about learning how to really clean up a photo and make it sing. This guy is a master. He's an ex-math teacher that went into landscape photography full time. And he has like 2-3 hour tutorials that, they're like $60-70 a piece, but the guy is really, I spent hundreds of hours also studying this guy, and it was worth every penny and time that I spent. So techniques, you guys are recognizing, I'm sure at this point. Leading lines, converging leading lines, by the way, are stronger, even stronger yet. And you got a triangle going again here. It's another powerful compositional element. All these leading lines just pushing you up, up, up. And you've got cool colors and these blues. There's actually blue in this water. I don't know if you can see it, but he pushed blues into his water in the foreground to push up towards the warmer rays of the sun on that mountain up there. He's big on border control, and what I mean by that is not having anything intruding on the borders, like having a tree here that kind of juts out of the frame, or something like that. He cleans up his borders a lot. He actually cleans up his photos a lot, so there's not a whole lot distracting in his photos. It's pretty easy to understand his work. It's just like, okay, I'm here. Whoa, is that pretty? And you go right there. And that's really all there is to understand. It makes it really simple for the viewer. And these turn out to be the most powerful photos. Interestingly enough, it's not having a lot of stuff in your shot. It's having the correct compositional tools that tell you where to go look. You know exactly where to go. So he's great, wonderful guy. This is the guy that influenced me the most to shoot tilt shift, and I'm not going to go off on that tangent today, only because that's a more specialized area of landscape photography. But Jack Brower is a Colorado photographer. He shoots down in the Telluride and Silverton area of southwest Colorado. He's well known in Colorado. The governor of Colorado had one of his pictures hanging in his office. He's been around landscape circles for a long time, and his compositional skills are beyond most. And I fell in love with his work, and so I emailed him. And anyway, he directed me towards the gear I'm using. I'll just leave it at that for right now. It's why I'm shooting Canon lenses on a Sony body, because he did, and there's some other reasons too. But very influential guy. We got to shoot with him. He doesn't do workshops, but we convinced him that he should do a workshop with Angie and me. Somehow we talked him into it. So he walked us up into one of his favorite places in southwest Colorado, and we shot aspen trees in the fall, and it was really great. And it was great getting to meet him, because he was legendary in my mind as well. I'd only conversed with him via email. But this is actually the moon. That's a moonrise. That's not the sun. And he lives up on tops of these mountains near Ouray, Colorado. He's up there all the time. Married a German girl, and she likes to go up there too, so they hike all the time. And okay, so the takeaway is, and this is really important, find out who you like. People ask me all the time, you're going to like different photos than I am, and vice versa. It's just that way. It's art is art. You have subjective feelings towards art. I would go onto Instagram, go onto their feeds, and just start pulling the guys and ladies that are your favorite shooters out of that feed and put it in another folder that you can follow, so you can follow their stuff. Start watching their work and see if they're using visual flow. You're going to find out they are. All the good ones are. And get a collection of their works and study them, and then find out if they have tutorials. And if they do, spend the money to get a tutorial, and you've got a 3-4 hour study session at home on your computer on demand. You can learn from these guys. They're pathfinders. They learned all this stuff. They can download it to you very easily. So I would say this is really important. Find out who you really want to emulate and then move that direction. That's what I did. I've got my favorites. Okay, so this is going to be a different kind of a section in that this is post Mark Adamus. This is after his workshop. And then I came back home and we probably slept for 2 weeks after being out there with him. Anyway, when I started thinking about visual flow, both in composing and in editing, I started applying this stuff, and all of a sudden, these photos are getting an enormous response, way beyond. And it's just using the stuff I'm talking about. I'm not an exceptional photographer, I don't think. I've just learned some things that work. And we like to travel and do adventure photography, so it all goes together and works great. But you can do this stuff like I can. You just got to learn it. It takes some time, but it's worth it. So anyway, let me back up. So I'm going to go through this. This is my shot, and there were some deliberate actions that I took to produce this. This is one of the top 25 shots I've ever taken with one of the workshop guys. So obvious S-curve, right, leading line. There's another powerful leading line, is an S-curve leading up, and also it's converging. It's getting smaller as it goes away. That's very powerful because the eye just goes right up that little highway, right up to the center here, which is the center of interest. And I deliberately darkened the foreground relative to the center of interest on purpose because, right, dark to light, your eye won't stay here. It's going to want to go up here. And I put cooler tones. There's some blue in the shadows here and more contrast to push that eye up towards the center of interest where the light is and all that beautiful color and so forth, that warmness where the eye wants to go. I find it rather interesting the eye wants to go there. It's just, there's probably some philosophical stuff there I don't know about yet. But anyway, and I put some diffusion back in here too, because that diffusion thing, anyway, we've already talked about that. But that was a deliberate thing, and bring up the brightness a little bit, the highlights in the water, so there's no question what the focal point is here. Okay, that's my point. So this is what I did. Feel free to copy any of it if you want to. These were deliberate actions I took, and this one did end up in my top 25 shots. I shoot thousands, and this ended up in the top 25. So I know this stuff works because I have this loop of people giving me comments back. I know it's working more and more all the time, actually. Okay, I'll make sure that everybody's down there, and I'll move on. Okay, all right. I have 5 of these, and one of them I'm going to ask you guys to help me figure out what's in the shot. Same thing here. The light was exploding out in Anna Maria one day as Angie and I were driving on the island, and so we ran out with our cameras. And anyway, so we had, when water recedes at the beach, this is important for Saturday, when these waves recede and pull back, they leave these foam trails behind them, and they're great leading lines, and they can be really pretty pictures. Adamus actually introduced us to that whole thing out in Oregon. Wait for the waves to retract, and they leave these great patterns in the sand that lead right back, towards the center, which is here, obviously. Wonderful diffusion in the back, kind of blocking some of that light on the sun, so it's a much easier exposure. Let's see what else. Also, when I'm thinking about it, make sure, this is a bullseye shot. I don't normally do that. Sometimes perfect symmetry works, and most of the time it doesn't. This time it seemed to work, so I left it alone. Normally I would have more sky or more sand. I wouldn't have it right in the middle like this, but this worked. I don't know why I just did. Sharp to softer, larger sand and stuff like that to smaller. It's the same old idea. You're directing the eye, your tour guide back to the light back here. Deliberately cooler colors down here. I put some blue into that sand very softly so you don't really discern it, but it's there, and it causes you to want to travel up towards where it's warmer and lighter. Okay. Again, I'm going to do this on each of these, so if you're interested, you can copy it. Pretty much the stuff we're talking about, but I'm moving pretty fast, so I want to make sure you guys get it, because this stuff changed my photography overnight. Okay, number 3, Mount Rainier. the old traditional S-curve going up to the middle, leading line to back to the, back here, large to small. Cooler colors, more contrast, moving back, less contrast, a little more diffuse. Lots of diffusion back here. I might even have accented that some, I don't know. But kind of the same ideas there. And be careful when you're doing these that you don't inadvertently chop off a tree like this, because if you did, it would probably bother somebody. This one's chopped off, but it's kind of an edge. It's kind of a bookend for me. It worked, but you generally don't want to cut off the tops of trees. Okay, this one I'm going to open up to the class. Anybody who wants to just, call out anything they see in here that is a visual flow element, go ahead. And if not, I'll just go through it. Anybody want to offer anything? I'll just do it. It'll be easier. Okay, cooler colors to warm, right? That's very deliberate. I put blue in all this down in here, more blue than was there. So shadowed blues, cooler colors up to the warmer tones up here. I took the saturation and the brightness out of the sky also, because I didn't want that sky to pull the eye too much. I wanted it to be down in here. A lot of the pros, by the way, like Max or even Atomus, they do this a lot. They'll pull the saturation out of those blues, because blues, I think, are maybe the most attractive color, if not the second. It'll just pull the eye like a magnet. So if you don't want the eye to go there, you should just diminish it in importance. Got nice internal framing here, with the sides here and the trees. You got a converging leading line. Again, converging leading lines are strong, real strong. They're just a pathway for the eye. You got large, high contrast, sharp to smaller, a little bit less contrast, a little bit less sharp, gets less sharper yet, and even back into diffusion back in here, it gets soft. This might have been sharper in the raw file, I can't remember. I think I actually diffused that on purpose because of the things we've talked about. I'll do one more after this, and then I think, I don't know what we have left in this section. Okay, everybody's done. Did you get that?
No.
Okay. You want it back?
Yeah, that's no.
I can't see with this light in my face, I'm sorry. Okay. Okay, this I think is the last one. Yeah. Okay, so again, deliberately got right down on this grass. This is up above Lucerne, Switzerland, looking down. That was probably the coolest place I've ever been in landscape photography. That place was just mind-blowing. You take these gondolas, up these mountains, and the Swiss just have this thing figured out. It's just incredible. It's crazy when you get up there. You're on the top of the world of these places, and they build hotels up here. There's a beautiful hotel over here on the top of this mountain, and all these walkways where you can go out onto these rocks. And they have ibexes, which is kind of like an American antelope, climbing on the rocks out there. It's crazy beautiful up there. Just nuts how pretty it is. So I got down on all this detail in here. I wanted this in the foreground on purpose, right? Because I could have just shot from here on up. It wouldn't have been nearly as dramatic, because you want foreground, middle ground, and background generally. So your eye goes boom, boom, boom. It's transitional layers. Foreground's really important, again, to ground the person in the photo. You got this fog was creeping up the mountainside with the afternoon sun. It was turning pink. It was just gorgeous up there. And then of course you got, dark, light. So you got all these layers going back. You got blues and high contrast and sharpness to more diffuse tones back here, less contrast, less black, less sharpness, and maybe even some diffusion on purpose back in here. By the way, if you want to get these sun stars, in case people don't know, just go to a smaller aperture like an f20, or this basically is giving you an image of the blades in your aperture. It's the blades. It forms these lines. I don't actually know how that works, but it does. So you go to a small aperture and you get these lines in your photos, and you can enhance them in editing. I love the sun stars. They're always fun to do. Okay, I think that's the last one. Yeah, this is the last one on this. Okay, we've already got it. Okay, so the takeaway is use visual flow theory in your photographs. Using it can generate a lot more, I should have underlined a lot, more powerful reactions right away. And Mark Adamus explained it this way. He said, you know, nature is very complex. When you look into a natural scene, there's a lot of stuff going on. And people, you know, when they look at a photo of all that stuff, they get confused. You need to simplify a pathway for them through the photo so they know what to look at and make it really simple. And he's right. I found that to be absolutely true. And that's what we do with Visual Flow. So it's break time. I know that was a long stretch, and thanks for being patient, but we'll kind of be heading into some later stuff here after the break. Planning and targeting shots. Thank you. Somebody asked me yesterday, was it Nancy? Asked me about planning shots. Was it you and I were talking? Right.
Angie about that planning shots.
Right.
Car dealership?
Yeah. So generally what I do is when I'm thinking about, let's say it's Anna Maria, right? I start Googling Anna Maria photos, and I start collecting photos, and I put them in a folder on my desktop. You just make a folder on your desktop on your computer, and then whatever pertains to that particular spot that you want to go shoot, you start dragging information in before you go. And that includes photos, it includes if you see a workshop in that particular spot that you're wanting to go, you toss that into the folder, and then you can get more specific and have subfolders with different spots in that area that you want to use as target shots. Again, these are on your desktop, and I end up with lots of folders because I have a lot of bucket list places I want to go. You know, I just do, and there's more actually. But I have stuff in all these folders for places that we want to go. And then what I do is I just drag those over and put it in a master folder called Trips on my desktop. So if I come across something I like on the internet, I just open Trips up, go to the folder, drop it in, and move on. And then when you come to planning the trip and you start looking on the calendar to see if you can do it, of course, first thing you got to do is check to see if there's any conflicts for that week. And we had a big one here. My wife had a hair retouch. Oh my word! It's like, what am I going to do with that? so I thought, okay, we can't do that week. It's like, but I started looking at the calendar, and then I start calendaring all the events that will happen once you get the ball rolling and you're going to do a workshop. I start putting in when sunrise is, it's in there somewhere, and blue hour, when blue hour starts, all that stuff, I put it in the calendar so it's on my phone in the field. And what else do? I use photo pills to figure out direction of light. In this case, if we're shooting Blue Lakes, the sun is going to be coming from this direction. So you know, depending on where you wanted the light to be, you'd know where the sun was going to be coming from. Really handy tool, by the way, photo pills. You're going to see me use that a little later. Yes. Yeah.
If you have Kelby One, they have like an hour and a half tutorial on photo pills.
This is a cool tool. I learned about it at our club from Jennifer Cordy. You know, when she was in town, she was talking about photo pills. I started using it then for the first time. This is kind of fun. This is behind our where we live. There's a kind of a saltwater bay behind us, and it's tidal, so it goes up and down. But anyway, I used photo pills to figure out this is a full moon that's going to rise, and it tells you what time it's going to rise at right around 8 o'clock, right over the mangroves, right here. So you could go out at 6, you know, or whatever time, 7, set up your tripod here, get all your settings ready, get everything all set, and then you just wait. And sure enough, that full moon came out right there. It's so cool. It's like, it takes all the mystery. Huh?
That's amazing.
It's totally amazing. It's mind-blowing how cool that is. Yeah, because you can plan your shots before you ever go. You can plan them months ahead. I'm planning a Milky Way shoot behind a barber stripe pole lighthouse in St. Augustine. We're going to go up for the birding festival in May or late April. And there's a great looking lighthouse up there, and the Milky Way is going to stand up straight behind it. So I'm using photo pills now to get all that locked in, and I put the times and all that into the calendar. So when I go, I'm ready to shoot. Also, I keep a manila folder for any of the trips that we do, and I throw in like airline tickets and just, you know, hard copy stuff, hotel confirmations, all that goes in there. I start putting contact information in on places that we're staying, because you might want to know how long it will take to get there if you're driving or whatever, and also the workshop leader and other people in the workshop. I'll put that information in contacts as well, so that you can use your phone to contact them on the trip or whatever. Okay, so then once I have these subfolders with all these pictures that I've gathered over time, and this is a workshop I actually haven't done yet, but I want to. This is my planning folder. There's some really cool spots back here around Blue Lakes. This is one guy, a friend of mine from Colorado, said this is the most beautiful place he ever hiked into. So this is on my list. But I'll go into this folder with all these shots, and then I'll say, man, there's one I've got to get. That's non-negotiable. That's on my target list, and I end up with target shots. Now, that doesn't mean I'm going to go copy their shot. That isn't what it means. But it means that particular perspective, that place that he's shooting, is pretty cool. I mean, this is Blue Lakes down here. There's actually upper and lower Blue Lakes. It's in Colorado. But so those become missions for me. Okay, to your point. So if we do this workshop, and we were going to do it in October, we decided not to this year. We have other stuff going on. We're going somewhere else. We're going to Northern Michigan, UP, with another workshop leader. But if we do go, this will be on my phone, and I'm going to look at it and review it the night before I go out, okay? And I'm going to have that so ingrained in my head that when we go out there, I'm looking for that. I'm not wandering around wondering where my composition is. I know what I'm going after. I'm deliberate about it, and you'll end up with really better shots if you do that. So thinking about your shots ahead of time will get you better shots. It's plain and simple. I found that to be true. If you just don't have a plan and you go out, it's sort of like hunting geese. I know when I was younger, we would hunt geese snow geese over in North Dakota, and they'd come in, they'd lift off these lakes by the hundreds of thousands. And if you're hunting, you try and bring a bird down because you want to eat them or whatever, or mount them, whatever you do with them. I don't hunt anymore, but there's so many birds when they go up. It's called flock shooting. You just tend to aim at the whole flock and shoot. Well, that's kind of what it's like if you don't have a plan in the outdoors, especially in the wilderness. When it's gorgeous out, it's gorgeous, and you don't know where to start. If you don't have a clue where you're going to start, you're just like, whoa, you're overwhelmed. So having a plan is good to know what you're going to do. And that includes anywhere you're going to go. Just have an idea ahead of time, have a shot in your mind what you'd like to end up with at the end of the day. And you'll end up with that shot, most likely, if you do that. Field prep. So let me back up one here. Generally, the night before, this is, say you're in a workshop and you know the next morning you're going to shoot, right? I like to have everything, I'm a type A anyway, but I have everything prepped. And I mean, when I say prepped, I'm going to go through it here. I make sure all the batteries are charged. Make sure, because if you don't charge them before you go out, say it's your first day out and you haven't charged them for a while, those things diminish in charge over time if you don't charge them. So you don't want to forget to charge your batteries the night before you go out. Stick them in the wallet, wherever you do. Same with your cards. Make sure you clean your cards off. If, make sure they're formatted and ready to go, because you're going to need them, and you're going to need multiples. Night before, these are nice to have. They're really lightweight rain, primarily for rain, but they're great windbreakers also. If you get into some rough weather, those are really easy to pack. Just roll them up, they're really small. Taking a snack is a good idea, because sometimes you're out from 4 o'clock in the morning until 10, and you get hungry out there sometimes, so take something along to chew on. Make sure you got a good lid. Gloves with the fingertips missing are wonderful. They're fishing gloves. I used to use them for fly fishing for steelhead. But they're great because you can work the dials and still keep your hands warm. Just the fingertips are cut off. You can buy them in fishing stores. Cabela's has them. Headlamps we talked about. Make sure the batteries are good. This is good for what we talked about. Cell phone charged, fully charged, and your boots are dry and so forth. So make sure all that stuff's laid out and ready. Clean your lenses. I have a sensor cleaner. I clean my sensors before I go out. I want a nice clean shot if I can get it. Set an alarm or two so that you don't miss the wake up time. If you do, you'll kick yourself, because you get one shot at that sunrise. And if you wake up and it's 8 o'clock and the sun's already up, you're like, oh my word, what did I just do? So I usually like to have at least 2 alarms set. And then target shots, I talked about that. I think about them the night before. So when I'm going out, I'm looking for those. My goal is to get those 3 shots in the can, so to speak. At the end of the day, I want those. And I might end up with 2 of them, but at least I got 2 that are ones that I plan for. And then you can sleep, you can rest. And when you get up, you're ready to shoot. You haven't got all that stuff to worry about out in the field. As far as preparation for the field the night before, if you're a landscape shooter, your camera menu should have a bunch of settings set up for landscapes. You probably all know that, but if you don't, You know, there's a bunch of settings that are specifically particular landscapes that you'll want to have your camera menu set up with. So basically, that's it on my camera, on my Sony. I'm not going to go through them, so if you want a copy of that, please take a picture. But you know, before next Saturday, you might just want to go through your camera menu and see if you've got those things. You know, with some of the things we talked about, like the focus indicators, here's the peaking level and the peaking color. Those are camera menu items that you want to set for landscapes. There's a bunch of them you're going to be using. You want to set your color space for Adobe RGB. You want to set it for RAW files if you're going to edit with a RAW editor. If you're not, if you're shooting JPEGs, leave it on JPEG. That's fine. It doesn't matter to me, but I would prefer that everybody's eventually end up shooting RAW files so you can do the editing and really have fun with this thing, and so forth. So make sure everybody's got it, and then I'll move on here. So on the back of the camera, nowadays, these cameras are built, this is a Sony, by the way. They have these C buttons on here, and those are custom buttons. Those are for you to set, you know, put anything you want in there. And by the way, you can adjust these other buttons too. All these buttons are adjustable to whatever you want. So you can set up your sequence of things that you want to do as a checklist, like a pilot goes through a checklist before he takes off. You can have this checklist set up in sequence from the front to the back. I start up here, I start with C1, I go to C2, I work through these dials, I work all the way down. And when I know I get to the bottom, there's nothing else to do. I got all my preference stuff is in there. It's all set from this, and you go to custom key in your menu to do this, by the way, to set these up. And I get all that done. And sometimes I'll even preset it the night before. I'll set my settings for what I know I'm going to see in the morning. And then I'm one step closer to being ready. And then lastly, on this the setting stuff, these up here are memory settings. Okay, so let's say you set up your menu items and you do all your custom buttons over here. You got it all set up the way you want it for landscapes, which are completely different than shooting wildlife. I want to make that point. If you're going to shoot wildlife, you don't want to use your landscape settings. Okay, you'll end up with terrible shots, and it works the other way around too. So you can, once you get all your settings for landscapes all locked in and dialed in, and boom, you just go in and it's in your menu. You set that #1 memory position for all of those landscape settings. And so, and then you set up, you do the same thing for wildlife. If you like to shoot wildlife also, or something else that's moving like race cars or whatever, you have your other settings for that genre over here on #2. Well, typically, you know, she and I are out shooting on Bean Point on Anna Maria, and there's like pelicans diving on fish, and it's, you know, beautiful sand dunes and light, and it's like, whoa, you know, do I want to shoot landscapes or wildlife, or do I do both? And so I'm back and forth. I'm literally turning this thing back and forth from 1 to 2, back and forth, and it works, and it saves a ton of time. You'll concentrate better in the morning if you're thoroughly prepped the night before. I believe in that wholeheartedly. I was trying to figure out how in the world I could show you all the different elements involved in the field, because you go out with these guys for 5 to 10 days. This is our workshop leader here. He's a Swiss fellow that lives in Oregon now, and his wife. Anyway, you know, there's a lot of stuff going on out there, and you know, we're always asking questions, and what about this, and how do you do that? So I thought, okay, what I'll do is I'll just go out and do it, because it's kind of becomes a little bit more natural for me now that we've done so many workshops. I'll just go out and shoot, and then we'll film it, and then we'll shrink that film down. So I took some iPhone shots as sort of a pre-planning measure, just to kind of figure out what's out there. And then I used photo pills, which I learned about from Jennifer Cordy recently at a LWRDPC meeting, and then I use it to drop a pin down where we're going to be on Anna Maria, and it'll tell us that sunrise is at 7:09 up on top, and that means that blue hour starts a half hour earlier at 6:39. And I can also look at this and figure out, from if I'm heading towards the ocean, the sun is going to be represented by that yellow line. That's the direction the sun will be coming from. So it'll be behind me, off my left shoulder, and it'll front light those trees and bushes down by the beach. This is where the heart starts pumping. Look at the lights coming up already. So we need to kind of keep moving. This is exciting. All right, so we're heading out as quickly as we can. I always feel like an athlete getting ready for a race. That's how I feel when I see the sun coming up like this. And I know we've got a limited time to get in, get parked,
get the gear out, walk in, set up, get your settings. Yeah, we throw this in the back. And it is sort of like an action sport because the really good light usually lasts about 5 minutes. The really good light. You'll get other light, but the really good light that everybody goes, wow, it happens in about 5 minutes. And so you have to be set up and ready. You can't, Mother Nature is not going to wait for you. The sun is not going to wait for you. So off we go. So at this point in the process, I start thinking about the shot, the settings. I want to get this picture in my mind of what it is I'm looking for, what it is I want to capture. And once I get that sort of settled, then I kind of know that will prescribe what settings I'm going to need. All right, so we made it. It's a great time to be out because the world changes in such a beautiful way for the next hour. It's something that very few people really experience, and we absolutely fall in love with it. So off we go. These mornings are so beautiful and so quiet, and the colors just get better and better as you approach that magic moment. So we're going to be heading in. I want to make sure and grab my coffee. See ya. Okay, so we're walking into the site. It's almost the beginning of blue hour. You're starting to see sort of a warm glow in the background. Now what I'm going to be looking for as I walk in here, as a landscape photographer, I'm looking for foregrounds, and I'm starting to see some. So I've got one over here that would allow us to have a little interesting foreground with that hole back there. And the way I'm thinking through this strategically this morning is I'm thinking with visual flow techniques. And so what I'm looking for is dark shooting into the light. We know from photo pills that the sun is going to be coming up. This is how we're walking in right here. The sun's going to be coming up off my back and off my left shoulder. So everything will be lit from the front. It'll be very pretty. And I think those trees will light up out here once the sun gets up a little higher. And we'll have this nice shadowed tunnel and leading line out to the beach, and all that working in our favor. So it's dark to light, cool colors in the shadows, out to the warm colors of sunrise, leading line with the pathway. We have a nice arched tunnel here, which is we refer to as internal framing. Got a nice internal frame here. Got a lot of good compositional elements that'll help make this photo special. So let's go back to flashlight again, and I'm going to continue looking for foregrounds. And the foregrounds are extremely important because they allow the viewer to feel like they're inside of the frame, inside the picture. They feel planted in the picture. To have a foreground fill the lower third of your frame, or even a half, can make a person really feel like they're there. And that's extremely important, I think, to do that in every photo that I do with landscape. So I'm guessing right here is going to be the composition that would be the best for me. So I'm going to set up right here. Okay, so I'm just going to run through a quick setup. Generally, this is the scene. I'm going to use my live view to sort of frame up some of these shots. I'm going to go down 24 millimeters on a 24 to 70 lens. And I'm just going to start looking through my live view to see kind of what this whole thing could look like, potentially. This is kind of a cool comp, I think, maybe right about in here, with the path leading line from the lower left to the right to the subject, which is the Gulf, and the trees and all that good stuff. So I think that's my composition right coming up. You can see the sun is already starting to hit these trees. That's how fast everything happens out here. So I'm going to keep working, and Angie's going to keep filming, and we'll get this done. Start to frame this up. And what I generally like to do, especially if I'm shooting here or lower, is to take out a stool, and I always leave my bag, or I keep my bag, I should say, really close. And the reason is because as things happen quickly, sometimes you need to grab a filter, or you need to take another lens out, or you need to do something. So I keep the bag close. I learned to do that because then you have everything you could possibly need right at your fingertips. So One thing that I learned is you don't want objects, especially in the foreground where you can see them really well with the high contrast, you don't want objects touching each other. You want separation between your subjects or the objects in your frame. So, and there we go. That's not bad at all. And I got a leading line going up from the lower left to the upper right, goes right out to the arched trees. All right, so again, I'm setting my camera up on ISO 100. I always do that. That's the native ISO for my Sony a7R IV. That's going to give you your best result when you go into editing. So that's going to stay at 100. I'm going to shoot my f-stop up to probably 18. I have these leaves in the foreground. I want them to go blurry on me, so I'm going to want depth of field to extend out to those. And then lastly, on manual mode, I'm going to adjust the shutter speed and bring up the exposure that way to where I want it. Now, if I go too far with it, I start getting these what we call blinkies, and that's an overexposure indicator. So you don't want blinkies in there. I see to keep bringing the shutter speed down. Right now we're at about 8 seconds to where the blinkies are gone. That's what I refer to as exposing for the highlights. And this is the action sport part of it, because that light is going to continue to change in its color and intensity, and it doesn't last as long as you think it might. So okay, and I'm going to do maybe that as a composition, and I'm going to check my settings again. So okay, ISO 100 native ISO is good, f18 is good for depth of field. I'm going to spin this open a little bit to brighten it up for focusing. Okay, on the focusing part, I also have a red focus indicator set up, and this is a menu setting in your camera menu. And I also have it on the front button up here on the top. If I press it, I can set it for high, medium, or low. I set mine at high because the red indicates where the focus is. Now I've got great focus out here. I haven't got great focus here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to zoom in, and I'm going to put that focus box on these leaves right down here, because I think these are going to be the ones to do so. And I'm going to zoom in tight, and then I'm going to use the focus ring to just dial that in and get it nailed. That seems like that's pretty good. So now we have exposure. We need to watch the exposure, so I'm going to bring that back down so the blinkies disappear. I have my focus set on the leaves here. I'm at f18, so I should be able to get this whole shot. And I'll go ahead and fire one. Now, when I fire this, I also have my my shutter set up on a 2-second delay. I don't use a remote release too much anymore because they're a pain to hook up. You have to hook it up under here, and with an L bracket and everything, it's very difficult sometimes. This is a lot easier. You don't want your camera to shake with hand movement. The sun is not even up yet. It's, what time is it? It's 6:54, so we have 6 and 7, we have 13 minutes until the sun actually comes up, but this light is spectacular. As I mentioned before, it's kind of low contrast light, and it tends to be really pretty light to film. It's pastel-y, it's forgiving, it's all kinds of good stuff. So you don't want to miss it. You want to really pay attention at this point in shooting, just because you know you want to get the light. You're chasing the light is what you're doing. So let me go ahead and shoot. Now the way I'm doing this composition is I have my live view set up on rule of thirds, right? And I'm going to use the lower bar here to put it right on the Gulf horizon there, so that I'm not bullseyeing the center. I'm kind of bringing more sky into the frame than foreground. I'm going to put the display back on horizontal leveling mode. Looks like we're good already. And you just have to kind of try different things. I think I'm going to put this rule of thirds level on the horizon this time, and I'm going to accent the foreground, and I'm going to get more of these sea grapes because I like sea grapes. Okay, so we're going to go in. You can already see I have some focus on these leaves and some on the trees, but I want to make sure this leaf is sharp. Looks like it is. I got red focus indicators already blinking at me, so that really helps. Okay. Now I have a bright sky, that light is coming up, and I'm going to have blinkies, so I got to bring those down. And again, don't worry about it. Look at those nice soft pastel colors in the sky. That's perfect, and I'll be able to bring up this foreground later in Lightroom and Photoshop. It won't be any issue at all. I think I might lift it up a little bit more for the composition. And I'm going to give it some more light so I can see what I'm doing. You just have to kind of try different things until you get the shot that just goes, wow. I like this leading line with the path a lot. It's like taking your eye back. You have sort of this triangular form here with the leaves and the path. Triangles are very powerful, pointers in a frame. All right, so my focus is good on the leaves and the tree. I just really have to bring that exposure back down within reasonable. Right there is good. One thing I have to be careful with is I don't want to do this with the tree, because you don't want this tree on the edge of the frame. So you want to give it a little breathing room. And that looks pretty good. Let me go vertical one more time. Look how nice this L bracket is for changing things out. It's so quick and easy. You really want to make sure you get one of these. If you haven't got one, you should get one. Okay, so we got these beautiful pastel colors going on, but if you shoot that, which looks to be kind of a normal exposure, if I were to shoot that, the sky would be blown out. There'd be no detail whatsoever. You wouldn't see the striations of blue and pink and yellow and all that out there. But if you take the exposure down, you start to see the colors. So make sure when you expose that you expose to the right of the histogram, I'm saying. In other words, bring those blinkies down. That's the easiest way to manage the light. And I'm just going to go ahead and fire this again, just because it's so pretty. It's pretty. Those are beautiful colors. Now, really down here, you have a little bit of faint light on the path, which is beautiful, because you can bring that up with shadow detail in post, and you'll have this beautiful soft leading line leading out to these colors out here with the arch. This is a pretty nice composition. It employs a lot of the elements we talked about today in class. You've got cooler colors in here, and I'm actually going to put some more blue into these shadows in post because you want cool colors to warm colors. And see, that light is warming up out there, so I want blue to red. And then I'm also going to have dark to light. I'm going to have leading line. I'm going to have internal framing, which is really cool. We didn't talk about that yet, but that's something you should always look for, is an internal frame. And if you have any fog or mist or anything atmospheric, that's always wonderful to have in your frame too. But you can see how beautiful this light is. It's just another kind of a cool arch coming in there. That's actually really pretty. You got to be careful with your edges again. Watch your edges. Make sure you don't have things intruding. I've got level. I'm a little bit bright because the sun is coming up, so I'll probably shoot it there. I'm going to test my focus again. Now this is actually very important to just go back in and just check your focus out at times. I'm going to put the attention on the tree back here now. So, okay, so again, bring back the exposure down to where it is not blinking at you. And I'm going to fire it. Oops, I got to get on 2-second delay here, I'm sorry. 2-second delay. That way you'll have a nice steady shot when it fires. Okay, and yeah, that's pretty. It's actually a really pretty composition. I like it. I might change it a little bit more because I'm kind of bullseyeing, so I'm going to maybe just shift it a little more this way. So the composition is, 1/3 foreground, 2/3 sky, with this beautiful arch and those great colors. And we'll check it out. It's really pretty, actually, because I'm actually liking this composition a lot. One thing that you want to try different heights. You want to try different lenses. Try shifting the lens up and down. Go vertical, go horizontal. You might even want to do a panoramic, which is another option where you could shoot 3 frames from left to right or 3 frames from the bottom to the top. And I've also found another composition, a little bit cleaner composition, where this foreground bunch of leaves here are separated from the tree, separated from this, pretty much. And I have a nice little archway for internal frame. I got the path on the right. It is a bullseye right now, so I might, that actually bothers people. It bothers people's eyes when they see that. So I might, I like the composition though, so maybe I'll go the other way. Sometimes a bullseye is okay. That's not a total bullseye. The Gulf shoreline, I should say the horizon line back here, is, it's not right in the bullseye, which is right here. It's a little bit off. So I'm just going to find the comp that I really like. I have to come up just a little bit because I love that arch. I don't want to cut that off. That's pretty. I think it's pretty. So again, check the settings, native ISO 100, f20. I'm okay with that. I don't worry about the edges anyway. I always put a vignette, a really soft, very soft, almost undistinguishable vignette on it anyway, so I don't worry about that too much. Sometimes you can get a little bit of distortion on the edges of your frame. I don't worry about that. Some people would. But shutter speed is the least important. There's nothing moving, so right now I just have to watch the blinkies and the sky again, which has gone very bright. I'm going to go down to those beautiful pastels again. Do one more double check on focus. That always pays. I can see I've already got it on these leaves, which is good, but let me just pop in, just fine tune it. That's beautiful. You can see the veins in the leaf and all that. That's what I like to see. And then just pop back out, bring your exposure back in line with reality. Okay, and we'll shoot it with a 2-second delay. Film days, this would not have been a great shot unless you wanted silhouetted trees, but digital is a whole different animal. I can bring this up. I can make this really beautiful. So, okay, so the light has been up about 15 minutes and I can see it starting to shine through some beach houses back here, and we're going to get some brighter light, which produces a sharper contrast and all that. I like this light right now, so I'm going to have to shoot in a hurry. Okay, so what we're talking about here is another composition. It'll be the last one for this movie today. And what I like about it is I have some dune sunflowers, which you can't really see because of the focus indicators right now, but I have dune sunflowers down here in the lower left of the frame. And so your eye is going to come in here, it's going to see those flowers and all that sharp contrast up front like it should be. Darker colors around it with some blue in there for shadows. It's going to go up this leading line out to the beautiful pastel colors of the Gulf, which look like this right now. So the way I'm going to expose this is, we've talked about it before. I don't want to blow out highlights, but sometimes I push it a little bit more. And I'm at 1/50th over a second, so that hopefully will stop the grass that's blowing. I'm going to go ahead and shoot this. I'm going to test it out. You can kind of get the idea. You can see that there's enough light in this path. I'll be able to pick this up in post. You got the flowers. I haven't got things going out of the frame, although over here I might. I might have to cut that out in Photoshop. This one's in. And I'm happy. I'm going to call it a morning. We're going to go have coffee or something. Thanks for tuning in. Appreciate it.
So here's what we ended up with. We have the kind of shadowed foreground leading out to those beautiful bright pastel colors. Got a little foreground element there to give it some more interest. And there's those beautiful bright dune sunflowers and the pathway leading off into that beautiful sky.
This is the shot that won the Universal Color Photography landscape. It was the award for the month for landscape. So this is where we're going. This is the shot I just shot. So I can tell you there's at least one dynamite composition out there. I can promise you that. When the light goes harsh, and it goes, usually I would say if we're out there at 7, by 9 we're probably done. And when you're in a workshop, generally we go back to the hotel or the motel and we sleep most of the middle of the day, and then we get up and go again. That's kind of the way it works, because the light's kind of harsh in the center of the day, the middle of the day. So, but don't forget, if you're going to shoot morning and evening, make sure and charge your batteries again. That's really important, because you need those batteries, and also your cards. If you're managing your cards, do what you need to do. Downloading, I'm not going to spend a lot of time here. Basically, the cards go into, I use an iMac for all my editing. I don't use my MacBook. Most of the pros do, though. They use their MacBooks for editing. And I go right over to Lightroom. I sift through them. I want the cream of the crop to rise to the top, so I know what I'm going to be editing. And then I do some raw universal edits in Lightroom, and I shoot right over to Photoshop. And editing is my very favorite part of this thing, as I mentioned earlier. I could easily spend 3 to 5, 6 hours on one shot and still not be done with it. And it's sometimes good to step away from an edit and come back, because your eyes get adjusted and you can't really see things that are going on that you probably should notice. So it's a good idea to step away and come back to it. Okay, so this is my workflow. I do some universal edits in Lightroom. I get over into here as quickly as I can. I start doing most of my heavy lifting over here. And at the end, I'll come in with Color Effects Pro, but you could also use Luminar to do things like
the soft glows that they add to the photos and so forth. Can add some nice finishing touches to a photo. And just, here's a raw photo I shot out on Mount Rainier, and you see these, because I was down low with these flowers, these trees are like, they're slanted, they're like boom. And there's a road up here, which I didn't really want to be in view. So with a raw file, you can take those trees and you can warp them back over to vertical, which is really fun to do. I do it all the time. In fact, the pros use warping a lot for their photos. Okay, this is a quick 3-minute, this is a 3-hour photo editing session condensed to 3 minutes. It's time-lapse.
My first impression is I don't know where to look, so I'm going to use visual flow techniques in my editing to direct the eye back to that volcano. And I have notes, which is actually my checklist to the right. What I'm editing, you'll see it, and it directs me to use visual flow techniques to accomplish the goal. So let's get started here, and we'll see what we can do with this photo to make it really pop. Well, I'm hoping your eye knows right where to go in this photo that's edited right back to the volcano. The editing sequence involves pulling your raw file pardon me, into Lightroom and then into Photoshop fairly quickly. And then as a final touch, I put the Nik color effects software in there. And I recommend, if you're just starting on the editing process, that you get Lightroom and start to learn how to use Lightroom. And then move out to Photoshop later. If you want to add some plugins to that later, you can.
Posting. Okay, so we started out this whole thing today with talking about the motivation for doing this, which is to, when you're just overwhelmed by the beauty of nature and how gorgeous it is, and you just have this feeling like, oh, I just got to show this to somebody. Well, we do what we do, and then we show it to somebody. That's posting. And if you feel like this when you're out there, the first thing you're going to do is say, where's my wife or my husband or my friend, whatever, where I got to show this to somebody. This is so cool. Well, that's what we do through posting. So I started thinking about, okay, art fairs, you have 50 to 100 conversations in a weekend, maybe, for all the work that's involved, that are really serious conversations about your art. And we sold some prints and all that, but it was a lot of work. So I started thinking about, well, how can we share the joy with more people, right? How do we do that? And I also was wondering how I'm going to know if my photography is really any good. And so I started thinking about social media. Okay, so I went out, started a Facebook page, and started gathering a friends list. And I was very careful in developing the friends list to pick people that I thought, I respected their opinions on my work. There are other landscape photographers, artists, friends that I respected their opinion, that sort of thing. And so you can have 5,000 friends on a page. So I actually have 2 short of that right now. Some drop away. But anyway, that's a great place to get your feedback on your work, because you post and within 24 hours, people are saying, wow, that's a home run. You should be hanging that on the wall. That's a prize winner. Or they'll say, nah. Well, you'll just know because you won't get any comments or feedback. It's just flat, you just don't have a winner, and then you can learn from that. So then I took it a step further, okay? And this is Facebook landscape groups, okay? You start multiplying the numbers very rapidly when you add groups, Facebook landscape groups into the picture. I posted 19 of them. It takes me about 10 to 20 minutes once I have a file all edited and ready. It takes about 10 to 20 minutes to load out to those groups. And then this is the audience out there on 19 groups. This one right here alone, Landscapes, Seascapes, and Cityscapes, has 151,000 members, okay? So if you want to share your work with a lot of people, this is the way to leverage it right here. And if you post here, there's a lot of the world's best shooters on there, because they know they got this huge audience of people that are watching this, and they're posting all the time, and they comment on your work, and this is a great place to. Somebody asked in the class yesterday, how in the world do we get feedback on our work? Are we going to have the ability to have somebody critique our work? That was one of the questions in the class yesterday. Well, here's, this is one way. You'll know, basically the way I know is if the way it's turning out for me right now is if I get a post per minute or a comment per minute, some kind of reaction per minute, it's going to end up in the top 25 generally. Usually if I get like 300 responses, it's a candidate for top 25. And so you get feedback in 24 hours on your work. That's how fast it is, and with a lot of people. So you're talking hundreds of thousands of people now reacting and responding to your work. That's a major multiplier and a great learning tool. And right away if you have a home run or a foul ball. You don't have to wait months to find out. In a day. You'll know actually quicker than that, because you'll see how fast the responses are coming in. The internet to me is like a modern day ham radio, in that, in the old days, the ham radio operators could call somebody, in a neighboring country or even further away than that and talk to them. Same way with the internet. When I post, within probably the first half an hour, more like 5 minutes, there's a little lady named Ann Bui in Thailand she's a missionary. And one of the sweetest ladies, we don't know her, but she'll comment, she always comments within 5 minutes of a post, and she's all the way around the world. And it happens, we have a buddy in Scotland, we have a buddy, we have them all over the world that are responding to your photography quickly. It's just crazy what we can do today. Okay, so we're talking about other ways to have people see your work. I think a website is one of the coolest tools you could ever have. This is Squarespace, it's $20 a month. If you go in, they have all these different templates. You have templates, you pick the template style you like, and then they've already done all the hard work. You bring your stuff in, your photos, your information about if you want to put a profile in there about your photography, your philosophy of shooting, all that, you can put all that stuff in there that people can read very easily. You can have galleries. You can do a blog section, which that's where my videos are going, is into this blog section on our website, and also contact us if people want to email you or whatever, or make comments, they can do that too. And within the website, one of the categories that I have under Doug's galleries is social media top 25. I actually started tracking this with a spreadsheet because I wanted to know, for a lot of reasons, which my best producing photos were. And so that one up there, which you've seen twice today already, is the top producing photo of all time. That got lots and lots and lots of responses. And so I know if I'm going to enter a contest, you know, I go to this list and I go to the top of the list, and I already know I'm going to get responses from it. You know, the judges may not like it, but at least I know that this is a wow photo. It has the wow impact. I know that because of the feedback I've gotten. So like I said, on this list, this is top 25. It's pretty hard to get in there now, so it's almost like a handicap in golf for me. I'm competing against my own numbers. I have to get past 300 just to even get on this list. And so I'm always kind of trying to, you know, I'll watch the comments coming in, and I see how fast the rate is on the comments, and which brings up another very interesting point I want to make. And I'm going to make it now because I don't want to forget. On Facebook, the algorithm is discriminating in one way. And let's say I post and Dave Kershan comments, hey, it's a lousy photo, you want to shoot next weekend or something. He comments, okay, and I just let it go. I don't say anything. I don't react to him at all. You get penalized for that on Facebook. Most people probably don't know this. Facebook wants people to start a dialogue, and they actually will reward you for doing so. So if I come back to Dave and I say, thanks Dave for that great comment, yeah, I'll meet you on Saturday at 8, now we've got a dialogue going, and you'll actually get more viewership on your post for doing so. That's a proven fact. So the whole bottom line is make sure people comment on your work that you comment back. Just say thank you or something, because the algorithm recognizes that as a dialogue. Okay, that's really important. I don't know why this is on here. Well, this is that forum I got invited into, which is a huge honor because these are all professional people that critique each other's work. And I guess the reason I put it in there was we did a workshop at Sean Bagshaw. That was my entry point here. That's the only reason I got in there. But these people are very famous. Charlotte Gibb is like really super famous. And these people comment on your work. It's crazy. And they find everything. Oh, my word. You know, you do a photo and you send it up there, and they will expand that thing on their screens, and they'll dissect that thing. Unbelievable. They'll find everything. They'll find spots that you didn't see. It's crazy how sharp their eyes are, and what a great place to learn. So that's just another way you can get feedback on your photography is the critique sites, and they're out there on the internet. Another comment, lady came in, this lady said, your photos always make me smile. That again, it's just, that's the whole reason I do this, and it makes it all worthwhile. Now, this is what I was talking about earlier. This is an actual quote if you want to copy it about the algorithm on Facebook. I wasn't just coming up with that. They say down here, make it a purposeful practice to reply to any comments on your post. The more you do, the more people will see the post, and that's very interesting. Most people don't know that. So if they comment, reply back to them. That's a conversation in Facebook's eyes, and they allow more people to see your post. How crazy is that? But that's the way it works. Okay, so this is the end of it. Let's say that, okay, you're in this class and you're going, I'm down here, and I think I need to be up here. How do I get up there? You know, I have to learn all these technical skills to climb this thing, and I'm just starting out, and how do I get my head wrapped around this stuff? Well, climbers know, and I used to climb. I used to climb rocks that was the crazy time of my life, which I'm not doing anymore, but climbers know that you make the first step, and it might take you another half an hour to make the next step. That's the way it goes. And then maybe you try another step, you know, and it might take an hour to do that. It's one step at a time to get up there. You're not going to get it all at once. You have to kind of go at this incrementally. So I'm going to run all these up here, and you can run a copy of it at the end. It summarizes everything that I've talked about today. Study top shooters' work, shoot the early and late light, use a wide-angle lens, tripod everything with an exclamation point. Use a delayed or remote release. Either way is fine. Just don't be pushing the camera with your finger because you're jarring the camera and causing your photo to be not sharp. Shoot raw files. You have to do that if you're going to do editing. You got to shoot raw. So learn to shoot on manual. You don't have to do that right away, but that's a great thing to do. You'll get more creative if you do that. Expose for the highlights. We talked about that. Stay off the right wall on the histogram. Stay with your native ISO. If your native ISO is 100 on your camera, stay as close to that as you can. In fact, I try not to even move it ever, because when you start pushing ISO up in low light, you start getting more grain. So I leave it at 100 and I work with the other two variables as much as I can to get the shot. Small apertures for large depth of field. That's what most people know that already. Zoom in for focus. Include foregrounds always. Try and find something interesting in the foreground in your shots. And compose with visual flow in mind. You want to have a target point you want to direct the viewer's eye to. And make sure you find out what that center of interest is in your picture, and then find ways to direct the viewer's eye to that point. And that we talked about all that. So study professional Lightroom and Photoshop tutorials. I've spent hundreds of hours doing that, and I intend to do even more. And lastly, post for lots of feedback, because feedback is how you learn. That's how you know if you've got home runs or strikeouts. So that's it, folks. Yeah, thank you for coming. I really appreciate you being here.